She was sold at 18 to a man whose family buried their enemies under the foundations of their own houses. No white dress, no love. Just a signature, a bloodline, and a cliffside mansion waiting to swallow her whole. But on the night Aria Voss was handed over to Kyle Moretti, heir to the deadliest crime empire on the East Coast, he didn't touch her. He didn't even raise his voice. He said 6 words that broke her more than any beating ever had. I chose you years ago. If you want to know how a silent girl learned to scream, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. The rain had been falling for 3 days when they came to take Aria Voss away. She watched it slide down the kitchen window of her father's brownstone in Queens, a thin silver curtain that blurred the street into smudges of yellow light. Somewhere past that glass, a black sedan was idling at the curb. She could hear the engine through the walls. Low, patient, the sound of something that had been waiting a long time and didn't mind waiting a few minutes more. On the counter in front of her sat a suitcase. One suitcase. Her father had been very specific about that. You don't bring anything from this house into his, Donato Voss had told her 2 nights ago, standing in the doorway of her bedroom with a glass of whiskey in his hand, and that same tired expression he'd worn since her mother died. He's got everything you need. He doesn't want your old clothes, your old books. You go to him clean. Clean. Like she was a gun being wiped down before a job. Aria had nodded because she always nodded. Nodding was safer than speaking. Speaking was a habit that had been beaten out of her by the time she was 12, when her uncle Marco caught her mouthing off to a visiting capo and dragged her down the basement stairs by her hair. Her mother had still been alive then. Her mother had cried, but her mother had not interfered. That was the lesson. You did not interfere with the men. You folded yourself smaller and smaller until you fit in the spaces they left for you. Aria. Her father's voice came from the hallway now, flat and tired. It's time. She turned away from the window. Donato Voss stood in the kitchen doorway wearing the same black suit he'd worn to her mother's funeral. He was not a big man, smaller than most of his soldiers, in fact, but there was a stillness to him that made people quiet down when he walked into rooms. His hair had gone gray in the 2 years since her mother had gotten sick, and the skin under his eyes looked bruised. He wouldn't meet her eyes now. She noticed that. A small, stupid part of her had hoped he might. Did you eat? He asked. Yes. Good. The drive is 90 minutes. You don't want to be hungry when you meet him. Okay. He nodded once, sharp. Come on then. Aria picked up the suitcase. It was lighter than she expected. Her whole life weighed less than 20 pounds, apparently. She followed her father down the narrow hallway, past the portrait of her mother in the dining room, past the little table where she used to do her homework as a child when the men were shouting in the kitchen and her mother would close the door and turn up the radio. At the front door, her father stopped. For a second, just a second, she thought he might say something. Something real. I'm sorry. I tried. I had no choice. Something that would let her carry a small, warm thing with her into the rest of her life. Instead, he said, Don't embarrass me. Then he opened the door. The sedan was a Mercedes, long and black and polished until it looked wet, even before the rain touched it. The driver, a thick-necked man named Benny she had known since childhood, got out and opened the back door without looking at her. Benny had bounced her on his knee when she was 5. Now he held the door like a waiter, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder. Miss Voss, he said. Not Aria, Miss Voss. That was new too. She understood. She was no longer the boss's little girl. She was freight now. Benny's job was to deliver her without damage, and part of not damaging her was not looking at her, not talking to her, not reminding her that she was a human being driven to a stranger's house to be married by the end of the week. She got in. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud. Through the tinted window, she saw her father still standing on the top step of the brownstone, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cigarette he hadn't lit yet. The rain was falling on him, but he didn't seem to notice. He was looking at the car. For a moment, their eyes almost met through the glass. And then Benny put the Mercedes in gear, and the brownstone slid backwards into the rain, and her father became a small gray shape getting smaller, and then nothing at all. Aria put her forehead against the window and closed her eyes. She did not cry. She hadn't cried since she was 14. Crying, she had learned, was a luxury. You cried in front of men like her father, and it gave them something to use against you. Instead, she thought about the name, Kyle Moretti. She had heard it her whole life the way some kids hear stories about monsters under the bed. The Moretti family ran the waterfront from Red Hook down to Perth Amboy. They moved guns through the ports, cocaine through the trucking companies, money through the construction unions. They had been at war with her father's people for a decade, and then 2 years ago they had stopped. A truce. Old Giovanni Moretti and Donato Voss had sat down in a restaurant in Bay Ridge and shaken hands, and a lot of men on both sides who had expected to die that winter had lived instead. The price of that peace, she understood now, was her. They hadn't told her until 6 weeks ago. Her father had sat her down in his study and said the words like he was reading a weather report. You're going to marry Giovanni's son. The wedding will be small. You'll move to their estate on the coast. You'll be taken care of, like an old dog. She had asked only one question. What is he like? Her father had looked at her for a long moment, and then he'd said, It doesn't matter what he's like. You'll adjust. Oh. The drive was 90 minutes, her father had said, but it felt like 4 hours. The rain got worse as they left the city. By the time the Mercedes turned off the highway onto a 2-lane road that hugged the coast, the windshield wipers were working at full speed, and Aria could see nothing beyond the glass but black water on one side and black trees on the other. Benny didn't speak. The radio wasn't on. The only sound was the rain and the hum of the engine, and somewhere in her own chest, the slow, steady thudding of a heart that she was almost annoyed was still bothering to beat. She thought about the things she had been told. He's young, only 26. He went to college, some kind of business school. He doesn't like to be touched without warning. That one had come from her Aunt Lucia, and Aria had not known what to do with it. He's dangerous, Aria. Don't forget that. Charm is part of the weapon. She thought about what she was supposed to do. Be quiet. Be grateful. Be useful. Produce a son inside 2 years if possible. Do not ask questions about the business. Do not make friends with the staff. Do not use the phone without asking. Do not, under any circumstances, embarrass the family. In the reflection on the dark window, she caught a glimpse of her own face, pale, narrow, her mother's mouth, her mother's tired eyes. She was wearing the dress her father had picked out, cream-colored, high-necked, the kind of dress a priest's niece might wear to a confirmation. She realized with a dull sort of horror, exactly like a virgin being led to an altar, which was, of course, the entire point. Miss Voss. Benny's voice startled her. He was glancing at her in the rear-view mirror, not quite meeting her eyes, but close. We're about 10 minutes out, he said. I wanted to give you a heads up. Thank you, Benny. He hesitated. The wipers slapped. She watched his shoulders, the familiar thick set of them, and for a confused second she was 5 again and he was lifting her onto the hood of a car to watch a parade. Kid, he said, and then caught himself, cleared his throat. Miss Voss, listen, I'm not supposed to say nothing, but he's not like his old man. She was quiet. That's all I'm going to say, Benny muttered and looked back at the road. That's all. Aria turned her face back to the window. Her pulse had kicked up, and she couldn't tell if that was good or bad. He's not like his old man. What did that mean? His old man, Giovanni Moretti, was a legend, and not the kind you wanted to meet. He had been photographed twice in 40 years, once at his wedding and once at his arraignment, and he had walked out of the courthouse that second time because 3 witnesses had fallen downstairs and one had simply never showed up to anything again. He's not like his old man. Maybe that meant kinder. Maybe that meant worse. In her father's world, both were possible, and often the second was mistaken for the first until it was far too late. The road curved, the trees fell away, and then, through the sheeting rain, she saw it. The estate. It sat on a cliff above the ocean like something grown rather than built. All gray stone and black iron, 3 stories of narrow windows staring down at the waves. A high wall circled the grounds, and through the wrought iron gate she could see a long gravel drive, a fountain that was currently running with rainwater, and at the top of the drive, a set of double doors lit by 2 iron sconces. There were men at the gate, 2 of them in long black coats with umbrellas in one hand and something heavier under the coats. They did not wave. They did not speak. The gate slid open. The Mercedes crunched up the drive. Aria's hands were in her lap, folded the way her mother had taught her, and she realized she could not feel her fingers. Not from cold, just a kind of distant, floating numbness, like her body had decided to go on ahead without her. The car stopped. Benny got out. He opened her door. He held out his hand, a small kindness she hadn't expected, and she took it and stepped out into the rain. An older woman was waiting on the front steps with a large umbrella. She was small, maybe 60, wearing a black dress and a plain wool cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and her face had the pinched, watchful look of a woman who had worked in a house like this for a long time and had learned which expressions kept her safe. "Miss Voss," she said, "I'm Mrs. Calvano, the housekeeper. Please, come in out of the rain." "Thank you." Aria walked up the steps. Benny was behind her with the suitcase. Another man, younger, in a dark suit, appeared from the shadows of the porch and took it from him without a word. Benny stopped at the threshold. He did not come inside. "Miss Voss," Benny said quietly. She turned. He was standing in the rain, not bothering with an umbrella, water running down the brim of his hat. His face was blank the way men's faces in her world were always blank when they had something to say and were not allowed to say it. "Your father said to tell you he—" Benny stopped, started again. "He said to be good." Her throat tightened. She nodded. "Tell him I will be," she said. Benny nodded back, got in the car, drove away. And then Aria Voss stepped through the double doors of the Moretti estate, and behind her the doors closed with a heavy, final click, and the rain was gone, and the world was gone, and she was inside. Yes. The entrance hall was enormous. She had expected that. What she had not expected was how quiet it was. Her father's house was never quiet. There were always men in the kitchen, soldiers in the living room, the TV on somewhere, a phone ringing, her uncle shouting at someone in Italian. The Moretti estate was the opposite. There was a fire crackling in a fireplace somewhere deep inside the house, and there was the faint ticking of a grandfather clock, and that was all. The floors were dark wood polished like still water. A wide staircase curved up to the second floor. Paintings hung on the walls, not the gaudy gold-framed stuff her uncles had collected, but somber old oil paintings of the sea, of men in long coats, of a woman with a severe mouth and eyes that followed you. There was no cross on the wall. There was no shrine to a dead grandfather. There was just space and old money and silence. "Please follow me," Mrs. Calvano said. "Mr. Moretti is waiting in the library." "Mr. Moretti?" Aria repeated before she could stop herself. "Which? Kael, miss, the elder Mr. Moretti isn't in residence." "Oh." Her stomach did something small and uncomfortable. She had almost been hoping for Giovanni. At least Giovanni was a known quantity. A monster, but a known one. Kael was the ghost. Kael was the young man she had never laid eyes on, whose face she had seen in exactly one photograph her father had reluctantly produced a month ago. A grainy surveillance image, mostly profile, dark hair, a sharp jaw, a mouth that wasn't smiling. She had stared at that photograph for a long time and had come away from it knowing nothing at all. Mrs. Calvano walked her down a long corridor. Their footsteps were silent on a heavy runner. At the end of the corridor was a door, dark wood, no handles she could see, only a thin brass plate. Mrs. Calvano knocked. Once. Paused. "Come in," said a voice from inside. It was not the voice she had expected. She had been bracing for something loud, something rough, something with his father's accent. This voice was low, even, and unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who had never in his life had to raise it to be listened to. Mrs. Calvano opened the door. "Miss Voss, sir." "Thank you, Teresa." The housekeeper stepped aside. Aria hesitated for 1/2 second, and then, because hesitating too long was its own kind of disobedience, she walked in. The library was smaller than she'd expected and warmer. A fire was burning in a stone fireplace on the far wall. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with books. Real books, the kind with cracked spines and dog-eared pages, not the leather-bound decorative sets rich men bought by the yard. There was a heavy desk, a worn leather armchair by the fire, and 2 windows overlooking the ocean. Kael Moretti was standing at the far window, his back to her. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. taller than her father, taller than Benny. He was wearing a dark sweater and gray slacks, and his hair was black and a little long at the back, slightly damp as if he'd been out in the rain earlier. He had one hand in his pocket. The other held a glass, but when she looked harder, it wasn't whiskey. It was water. He did not turn around immediately. "Miss Voss," he said to the window, "thank you for coming." Something in her chest gave a strange, sharp little twist. Thank you for coming. As if she had come on her own. As if she had not been driven here in a car with the doors effectively locked. "Mr. Moretti," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. He turned. She had expected handsome because men like him were always called handsome in the stories, and he was, in a way, but not the way she'd been braced for. His face was not warm. His mouth was serious. There was a scar, small, pale, at the edge of his left eyebrow. His eyes were dark and very tired. He looked like a man who had not slept well in a long time, and who had stopped expecting to. But when his eyes found hers, they didn't look through her. They didn't crawl over her the way her uncle's friends had been crawling over her at family dinners since she was 15. They looked at her, specifically, as if there had been some question about who she was, and now he had his answer. "Please," he said, "sit." He gestured at the armchair near the fire. She didn't sit. She stood where she was, hands folded in front of her. He noticed. He didn't push. "All right," he said quietly. "Then I'll stand too." He set his glass of water on the desk. He didn't come closer. There were maybe 10 feet between them. A careful, deliberate distance, and she realized after a second that he was doing that on purpose, that he was the one keeping the distance. "You must be exhausted," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not. It's a long drive and a worse reason. You don't have to pretend in here." The calmness of it, the plain honesty of it, made her wary. Her father's world ran on lies so thick you could stand on them. Nobody in her father's world said, "You don't have to pretend." They said, "Smile." They said, "Be grateful." They said, "Don't make a scene." "I was told," she started, and then stopped. She had been told a lot of things. She tried again. "My father said the wedding would be at the end of the week." "It will be, if you want it to be." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" He held her eyes. "If you want it to be," he said again, slower this time. For a long second she thought she must have misheard him. She replayed it in her head. She watched his face for the trick, the little tightening at the mouth, the look away, the small tell that meant "I'm testing you," and the wrong answer will cost you. She had spent 18 years learning to read those tells. She was very good at it. She did not find one. "I don't understand," she said. "I know. I'm going to try to explain." He gestured again at the armchair. "Please, you can stand if you want. I'm not going to make you sit. But I'd like it if you sat. My neck hurts from looking down at people." It was such a small, stupid, human thing to say, "My neck hurts," that before she fully decided to, she had walked over to the armchair and sat down on the edge of it, knees together, hands in her lap. She felt absurd. She felt like a child in the principal's office. Kael pulled the desk chair out, turned it to face her, and sat down in it, so that they were roughly at eye level, with a careful stretch of rug between them. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and folded his hands. "Here's what I want to tell you," he said, "and I want to tell you now, in this room, before anyone else gets the first word in. Because once the families start talking tomorrow, you're going to hear a lot of things about me and about why you're here, and most of them are going to be lies or half-lies, which are worse. So, while it's just us—" He paused. He seemed to be choosing words carefully. "Your father and my father made a deal 2 years ago," he said. "I know you know that much. The deal involved a marriage. Neither of them asked either of us. That's how these things get done." "I know." "Okay. So here's the part that nobody's told you." He drew a slow breath. "When my father came to me 2 years ago and said, 'You're going to marry Donato Voss's daughter,' that wasn't the first time I'd heard your name." She went still. "I'd seen you," Kael said, "once at a benefit in the city. You would have been 16, maybe 17. You were standing by a window with a glass of water in your hand, and your uncle was trying to introduce you to somebody, and you kept, very politely, not hearing him. You had this—" He made a small, awkward gesture at his own face. "This look, like you were somewhere else. like you were waiting out a train. She could feel her pulse in her ears. And I asked somebody who you were, he went on, and they told me, and I remembered. I don't. Her voice came out rougher than she wanted. She cleared her throat. I don't remember you. I know, you wouldn't. I didn't come up to you. I wasn't. He stopped. For the first time he looked away, at the fire, and she saw him weigh what he was about to say. I wasn't going to be that guy. A stranger in a suit leaning on a 17-year-old girl at her uncle's party. I went home. Then, how? 2 years later, my father calls me in, tells me about the deal, tells me the girl is Donato Voss's daughter. He looked back at her. I didn't tell him I'd seen you before. I didn't tell him anything. I said, okay. The fire popped. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed, a soft musical sound. I chose you, Kael said, years ago, before any of this. The words landed strangely in the room. They didn't float. They sat there heavy, the way a stone sits on a table. Aria stared at him. Her mouth was dry. She understood distantly that he was waiting for her to react, that he had set this thing down between them and was watching to see what she would do with it. What she did was laugh. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the short, disbelieving, slightly cracked sound a person makes when they are too tired to cry. It surprised both of them. She clapped a hand over her mouth. I'm sorry, she said from behind her hand. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. That was the worst possible thing you could have said to me. He didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, as if he had half expected it. Say more, he said. What? Tell me why. She lowered her hand. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time. The tired, dark eyes, the scar at the eyebrow, the careful, deliberate distance, the way he had sat down so she wouldn't have to look up. Because, she said, and the word came out shaky, I have spent my entire life being something someone chose. My father chose what I wore. My uncles chose who I sat next to at dinner. They all chose which rooms I was allowed in. And now I come here and you, a man I've never met, tell me that you chose me too, and you say it like it's a gift. She swallowed. Mr. Moretti, with respect, it is not a gift. It is the same sentence in a different mouth. The room was very quiet. Kael Moretti looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned back in the chair. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with his thumb and forefinger, a small, unguarded gesture that made him look, briefly, like any 26-year-old who had just been told he was wrong. Okay, he said. Okay, that's fair. I wasn't trying to be fair. No, it's fair. He lowered his hand. His eyes were on her steady. You're right. It came out wrong. What I meant, what I was trying to say, was that I'm not doing this because my father told me to. I want you to know that. I'm not standing here because a deal was signed. If the deal hadn't been signed, I would... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I would still probably have done something stupid about it eventually, that's all. She didn't know what to say to that. But you're right, he said again. Choosing someone without them knowing isn't choosing them. It's just wanting them. And a lot of men have probably wanted you without your permission. She looked down at her hands. Yes, she said. Then I'm sorry, Kael said, for saying it that way. I'm sorry. She could not remember the last time a man in her father's world had said those two words to her. Her uncles did not apologize. Her cousins did not apologize. Her father had once, when she was 9, apologized for stepping on her foot at a wedding, and it had shocked her so badly she had cried, which had annoyed him. That was the entire archive. She looked up. What do you want from me? She asked. Tonight, this week, this arrangement. Her voice was low. Please just tell me. I will manage it. I have been managing these things my whole life. I just need to know the rules. He watched her. I don't have rules, he said. I have one request, if you're willing. What? Stay here until the end of the week. Don't marry me. Don't agree to anything. Just be a guest. You have your own room. Mrs. Calvano will bring you anything you need. The grounds are yours, the library is yours, the kitchen is yours. Nobody comes into your room without you asking. He paused. At the end of the week, if you want to leave, you leave. I'll drive you myself. I'll handle your father. I'll handle mine. She stared at him. That's not possible, she said. It is, actually. They'll kill you. They'll try. She laughed again, the same cracked, helpless sound. You don't know my father. I know my father, Kael said. I know what it costs to tell him no. I've been doing it since I was 14. A small, humorless smile. I'm still here. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She didn't know what to do with her face. Something had come loose in her chest that she could not name and did not trust. A small, feathering, dangerous thing. The first stirrings of a hope she had trained herself for 18 years not to feel. Why? She said finally. Why would you do that? Kael was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the fire. Then he looked at her again, and in that look there was something she could not read. Tiredness, maybe. And something else. Something older and more bruised. Because I've watched my mother live in this house for 30 years, he said, and she did not choose to be here either. And I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever got the chance, I wouldn't do to another woman what was done to her. The fire popped. Aria realized her hands were trembling. She pressed them into her knees to still them. I don't believe you, she said quietly. I want to. I can't. I know. You could be... She shook her head. You could be very good at this, at seeming kind. Men in my world, they... I know, he said again. I'm not asking you to believe me tonight. I'm asking you to take the week. She looked at him a long time. Outside, the rain was slowing. She could hear it less. The fire had burned down to a low red glow, and the library had gone soft and dim around them. I would like to go to my room, she said. Of course. He stood. He did not come toward her. He walked to the door instead and opened it for her, and stood well back. Mrs. Calvano is right outside. She'll show you up. Aria got to her feet. Her legs did not feel entirely like her legs. She walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped because she could not help it, and she looked up at him. He was taller than her by a head. Up close she could see that the scar at his eyebrow was old, childhood maybe, and that his eyes, which she had thought were simply dark, had small gold flecks near the pupil. He did not move. He did not lean down. He did not touch her. Mr. Moretti, she said. Kael. Mr. Moretti, she said again, because she was not ready. What if at the end of the week I still want to leave? He looked down at her. His face did not change. Then you leave, he said, and I don't try to stop you. And I don't come looking. And your father, that's my problem. And mine. That's my problem too, he said quietly. If you want it to be. She stood there a beat longer. She did not know what her face was doing. She did not know what her hands were doing. She only knew that something in the bedrock of her life had shifted half an inch. A small, seismic thing, almost nothing, but enough that when she walked out of the library, she was not walking on the same floor she had walked in on. Mrs. Calvano was waiting in the hall. This way, miss, the housekeeper said gently, and Aria followed her up the wide staircase, down a long corridor lined with more of those somber paintings, to a door at the end that opened onto a room bigger than any bedroom she had ever slept in. A high ceiling, a wide bed, a window with a seat built into it, and beyond the window the dark rolling expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Her suitcase had been set at the foot of the bed. Not opened, just placed there. On the nightstand someone had left a plate, a sandwich, cut in quarters, crusts removed, and a small glass of milk. It was such a strange, childish thing that for a second she couldn't make sense of it. Then she understood. You must be exhausted, he had said, and then someone had gone down to the kitchen and made a girl who had not asked for anything a plate of food she could eat in her room without having to talk to a single other person. If you need anything in the night, miss, Mrs. Calvano said at the door, there's a bell by the bed. I'm down the hall, not far. Thank you. The housekeeper hesitated. For a moment, her pinched, careful face softened, and Aria saw, very briefly, the woman underneath, someone who had watched a lot of girls walk through this house, and who maybe had her own opinions about what happened to them. Sleep well, Miss Voss, she said. Thank you. The door closed. The lock, Aria noticed, was on her side. She stood in the middle of the enormous room for a long time. She did not eat the sandwich. She did not cry. She did not do any of the things she had imagined in the car on the way here, that a girl in her position would do. Instead, she walked slowly to the window seat and knelt on it and put her palms flat against the cold glass, and she looked out at the black ocean, and at the rain that was finally easing, and at the thin silver line of the horizon where the water met the sky. "I chose you," he had said, years ago. She had told him it was the same sentence in a different mouth, but somewhere, very small, very quiet, under all the alarm and the suspicion and the 18 years of training that screamed at her not to be stupid, somewhere, a voice she barely recognized as her own had asked a dangerous brand new question. What if it isn't? She pressed her forehead against the glass. The ocean kept moving, indifferent, huge. Somewhere in the house, that clock chimed again. And Aria Voss, who had been raised to be silent and obedient and small, sat at the window of a stranger's house on a cliff at the edge of the world, and for the first time in her life, she did not know what was going to happen next. She did not know if that was a good thing, but she noticed, with a kind of dim surprise, that her hands had stopped trembling. She slept badly. Not because the bed was uncomfortable. The bed was, in fact, the most comfortable thing her body had ever touched. A deep, soft mattress under a heavy quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. She slept badly because for the first time in her life she was alone in a room where nobody could come in without her permission, and her body did not know what to do with that information. She kept waking up. Every hour or so her eyes would snap open and she would stare at the ceiling, waiting for a sound, a footstep, a door, a voice in the hall. And when none came, she would lie there listening to her own breathing until she drifted off again. Around 4 a.m, she gave up and went to the window. The rain had stopped. The ocean had gone a darker shade of black under a sky that was just starting to think about gray. She sat on the window seat with her knees pulled up under the nightgown Mrs. Calvano had left for her, and she watched the horizon. She thought about her father. She thought about what he would do when he found out she had not gotten married at the end of the week. She thought about his face, the tired, bruised eyes, the thin mouth. And she tried to picture him hearing the news, and she couldn't. Her father's rage was not a thing you could imagine in advance. It was always smaller than you expected, and worse. It did not shout. It called a meeting. It decided who would live in which apartment now. It transferred a man from the waterfront to the trucks, and the man understood, without anyone having to say so, that his life had just been shortened. She thought about Cale saying, "That's my problem," and she did not believe him. Not fully, not yet. But she noticed, and this was the thing that had kept her awake, that she wanted to. At 7, a soft knock came at the door. "Miss Voss, it's Mrs. Calvano. Breakfast is downstairs whenever you're ready. There's no rush, nobody's waiting on you." "Thank you," Aria called through the door. Her voice came out hoarse. "I'll be down." "Take your time, dear." Dear. Another word she was not used to. In her father's house, the women had called her you. You, come here. You, pour the wine. You, go sit with your aunt. The name Aria had mostly lived inside her own head. She washed her face in the attached bathroom, which was the size of her bedroom at home. She put on the gray wool dress her father had packed. Modest, sober, the kind of dress a girl wore to a second funeral. She brushed her hair out and braided it down her back, because that was how she had worn it every day since she was 13. Then she stood in front of the mirror for a long time and looked at herself. The girl in the glass looked exactly like she always had. Dark hair, narrow face, watchful eyes, mouth set in the small, careful line of a person who had learned very early that nothing good came out of it. "Okay," she told the mirror quietly. "Okay." She went downstairs. She got lost twice. The house was the kind of house you could get lost in, even if you had lived there your whole life. Long corridors branching off each other at odd angles. Doors that looked like they led somewhere important and turned out to be closets. A small sitting room with a fire already lit in it, no one in it, as if the fire had been laid for whichever ghost came by first. She passed 2 men in dark suits on a landing. Guards, she understood instantly, from the way they stood. And they did not speak to her, only nodded once, and she nodded back, because that was the language. She found the dining room by smelling coffee. It was a long room with a long table. Only one place had been set, at the far end, near the window. Cale was not there. A young woman in a black apron was setting a small silver pot down on a warming tray, and when she saw Aria, she dropped a quick, nervous curtsy. "Miss Voss." "Good morning. Mr. Moretti asked me to tell you he had to step out to the stables, but he'll be back before lunch. He said," she hesitated, consulted her memory. "He said to make yourself completely at home, and that Mrs. Calvano will answer any questions, and that you shouldn't wait for him for anything." "Thank you." The girl, she couldn't have been more than 20, hovered. "Can I get you anything else, miss? Eggs? Toast? We have— Toast is fine." "Yes, miss." The girl fled. Aria sat down at the long table alone, in front of the silver pot of coffee and a small white cup, and she realized after a second that there was a folded piece of paper beside her plate. She stared at it. Then she picked it up and unfolded it. "Aria, you don't owe me a breakfast conversation. I thought you might want a morning to yourself before we talk again. I'll be back around noon. The grounds are yours. There's a path down to the water behind the south terrace if you want it. The guards at the gate know not to stop you. Nobody here is going to ask you where you're going. K." She read it twice, then a third time. She folded it back up very carefully and put it in the pocket of her dress. She poured herself a cup of coffee. Her hand was steady. Nobody here is going to ask you where you're going. She had not realized until she read that sentence how heavy it had been. 18 years of someone always asking, someone always knowing. The absence of it was, for a moment, almost dizzying, like stepping off a bus you hadn't known was moving. She did not go down to the water, not yet. That felt like too much all at once. Instead, after breakfast, which she barely touched, she wandered slowly through the downstairs. Nobody stopped her. A guard in the front hall nodded at her and went back to looking at nothing. Mrs. Calvano passed her once in a corridor, carrying a stack of folded towels, and only smiled and said, "The morning room is lovely this time of day, miss, if you want sunlight." She found the morning room. It had tall windows that faced east, and the sun was just starting to push through the clouds that were left over from the storm. There was a piano against one wall, an old one, upright, dark wood, the keys yellowed with age. She walked over to it before she thought about it. She had not touched a piano in 6 years. Her mother had taught her, back when her mother could still get out of bed. They had played together in the little sitting room of the brownstone, her mother patient and laughing, Aria's small hands stumbling over the keys. Then her mother had gotten sick, and then her mother had died. And her Uncle Marco had said at the funeral, "No more piano. Your father doesn't need that noise in the house." And that had been the end of it. The piano in the brownstone had been covered with a sheet and then eventually sold, and Aria had forgotten, or pretended to forget, what her own hands could do. She sat down on the bench now and lifted the lid. The keys were cool under her fingertips. She pressed one, middle C. It rang out, clear and a little out of tune, and in the quiet morning room the note seemed to hang in the air forever. She played a scale. Slowly. Her hands were stiff. She played it again. She did not play a song. She was not ready for that. She just sat there for a long time, running scales, and somewhere in the middle of it, her eyes filled up without warning, and she had to stop and press the heel of her hand against them, hard, until the burning went away. When she looked up, Mrs. Calvano was standing in the doorway with a tea tray. The housekeeper did not say anything about the eyes. She just set the tray down on a low table. "It's been a long time since anyone played that," she said quietly. "Whose was it?" "Mr. Kael's mother's." Aria's hands came away from the keys. "Oh! No, dear, play." She'd have liked that. Mrs. Calvano poured the tea without looking at her, which was a kindness. "She hasn't been well enough to play in years. It's just been sitting there, going out of tune." "Is she—" Aria hesitated. She didn't know the rules of this house yet. "Is she here?" "In the east wing. She doesn't leave her rooms much. Mr. Kael sits with her most evenings." Aria filed that away, carefully, in a place where she was keeping a small growing list of things that did not match the picture of Kael Moretti she had been handed at birth. "Would she—" Aria started and stopped, because she didn't know how to finish it. "Would she mind? Would she like to meet me? Would she want a stranger in her son's house to know she existed?" "Maybe in a few days," Mrs. Calvano said gently, as if she had heard the whole question. "When you've settled in, she has good days and bad days. I'll tell you when it's a good one." "Thank you." The housekeeper nodded and slipped back out. Aria sat at the piano a while longer. She did not play. She only rested her hands on the keys and listened to the house breathing around her. The creak of old wood, the distant clatter of something in a kitchen, the slow, steady ticking of a clock in another room. And she thought, there is a woman somewhere in this house who was brought here the way I was brought here. And she is still here, and that is either the most comforting thing I have ever heard or the most terrifying one. She was not sure yet which. Cale came back at noon. She heard him before she saw him. A door opening somewhere in the entrance hall, boots on the wood floor, a low voice saying something to one of the guards, a rougher voice answering him, and then a short bark of laughter that she recognized, with a small internal jolt, as his. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. It was a short sound, a little rusty, like a laugh he didn't use often. She was in the library by then. She had gone back to it on purpose, because the library was the room where he had said the honest things, and she wanted to see if the room still felt that way in daylight. He came in with his hair damp from the stables, and a faint smell of rain and leather on him. He had changed into a dark work shirt with the sleeves rolled, and there was a smear of mud on the knee of his pants that he had clearly not noticed. When he saw her standing by the bookshelf, he stopped in the doorway. "Oh," he said. "Hi." "Hi." He looked down at himself and made a face. "I was going to clean up before I found you. I'm sorry." "It's fine. There's hay in my hair, isn't there?" "A little." He reached up and combed his fingers through his hair and shook his head like a dog, and a small piece of straw actually fell out onto his shoulder. Aria, despite everything, despite the hollow feeling in her stomach and the letter folded in her pocket and the fact that she was technically this man's fiancée, felt a small, startled laugh come up in her throat. She caught it before it got out, but only barely. He noticed. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. An acknowledgement. "You slept?" he asked. "Some." "That's more than nothing." He gestured vaguely at the room. "Have you eaten? Not the toast." "Actually eaten." "I'm not very hungry." "Okay, I'm going to go wash and change. Then I thought, if you wanted, we could walk. The path down to the beach. It's not cold. You wouldn't have to talk. You wouldn't have to not talk either. You could do whatever you wanted." He paused. "And if you'd rather have the afternoon to yourself, that's also fine. Say the word, and I'll disappear." She looked at him. The mud on his knee, the straw on his shoulder, the tired dark eyes that had not slept any better than hers. "I'll walk," she said. The path was a narrow one, cut into the side of the cliff, switching back and forth as it descended to a small crescent of gray sand 100 feet below. The ocean was enormous down there, much larger than it had looked from her window. White foam ran in long, ragged lines across it, where the wind was tearing at the tops of the waves. Cale walked in front of her for the steep parts, and beside her for the flat stretches. He did not offer his arm. He did not touch her. At one point she stumbled on a loose stone, and he half turned, hand out instinctively, and then caught himself and pulled the hand back before she had quite finished catching her balance on her own. It was a small moment. She noticed it. They did not talk for the first 10 minutes. The wind was too loud. Gulls were screaming somewhere up the cliff. Aria had pulled on a wool coat Mrs. Calvano had produced from somewhere. Too big for her, probably Kael's from years ago. And she held the collar closed at her throat with one hand and let the wind take her braid where it wanted. When they reached the sand, he stopped. "There," he said. "I won't make you go any further." "I don't mind." He looked at her, a little surprised. "All right." They walked along the edge of the water, not close enough for it to reach their shoes. She noticed again how careful he was about the line, just close enough to hear the suck and hiss of it on the sand. After a while, he spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "How much did your father tell you about me?" She thought about it. "That you're 26, that you went to business school, that you're dangerous and charm is part of the weapon." Cale made a small amused sound through his nose. "That sounds like Donato." "You know him?" "I've met him twice. I've heard about him my whole life." "And?" He hesitated as if deciding how honest to be. Then he said, "I think your father is a man who figured out early that love is expensive and fear is cheap, So he ran his household on fear. He glanced at her. I'm guessing that matches what you know. She said nothing, which was itself an answer. My father's the same, Kael said, looking back at the water. A little worse, maybe. A little better at hiding it in public. My mother... He stopped, found the next sentence. My mother was 20 when they married. She was from a family in Calabria. She didn't speak English. My father liked that, I think. He liked that she couldn't call home easily. Aria was quiet. She was listening so hard her ears hurt. She learned English, Kael said. Fast, she's sharp. She was sharp. She had me when she was 21, and for the first 10 years of my life, she was this. He shook his head as if reaching for a word that wasn't there. This bright, loud, funny woman. Then something happened when I was 11. I still don't know the whole of it. Something between her and my father. She stopped talking. She stopped playing the piano. She started getting migraines that lasted days. The doctors called it a lot of things over the years. I think she just stopped. He stopped walking. He bent and picked up a flat stone and turned it over in his fingers. I watched her disappear inside that house, he said. Slowly, over 15 years. And I couldn't do anything about it, because I was a kid and then I was a teenager, and by the time I was old enough to understand what I was looking at, she was already mostly gone. He straightened up. He looked at the stone in his hand. He didn't throw it. So when my father told me about you, he said, and about the deal and what was expected, that was the first thing I thought of, not the marriage, her. I thought, I'm not doing this, not the way he did it, not if I have any choice at all. Aria's throat was tight. But you didn't say no, she said quietly. No. Why? 2 reasons. He finally threw the stone. It skipped twice and sank. 1, saying no outright would have killed the truce. Your father would have taken it as an insult. A lot of men who work for both our families would have gone home in boxes by now. I couldn't... He gestured at nothing. I couldn't spend those lives for a principle. I know how that sounds. And 2, he looked at her. The wind was pulling his hair across his forehead. 2, he said, was that if I said no to the marriage, somebody else got you. Some cousin. Some arrangement further down the line. I knew your father. I knew that once you were promised, and it was going to be somebody. I thought, his jaw tightened. I thought maybe if it was me, at least I could try to do it differently. At least I could try not to be him. She stopped walking. The ocean kept going. A gull landed on a rock and yelled at them and flew off again. Kael, she said, the first time she had used his name. It came out before she decided to. He turned. That is a very, she tried to find the word, a very convenient story. The corner of his mouth did that not quite smile thing again. I know. It lets you off the hook for everything. It does. It makes you the hero of a thing that was not heroic. Yes. I don't know if you're telling me the truth. I don't know how to prove to you that I am, he said. I've been thinking about that for weeks. I don't think there's a thing I can say. I think I just have to show up every day this week and not be my father and see if at the end of it you believe me a little more than you did at the beginning. She studied him. The wind was cold on her face and her eyes were watering a little from it, and she was not sure anymore if it was only from the wind. What if I don't? She said. What if at the end of the week I still don't believe you? Then you leave, like I said. And your life. My life is my problem. Stop saying that. He blinked, surprised. Stop saying that like it cost you nothing, she said. Her voice came out sharper than she'd meant. If you say no to my father, men die. If you say no to yours, I don't know what happens to you, but I can guess. Don't tell me it's your problem like it's a parking ticket. Tell me the real price and let me decide if I'm worth it. Kael stared at her. For a second, she thought she'd gone too far. She had forgotten, for a breath, who he was. That he was not a boy on a beach, but the heir to a crime family, and she was in his coat on his sand below his house, and she had just raised her voice at him. Her stomach dropped, but he did not get angry. His face did something else, something softer and more complicated, something that almost looked like relief. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. Fair. He took a breath. The real price, he said, is that if I break the deal, my father will probably disown me. He'd do it publicly. He'd cut me out of the operation. I'd lose my, he gestured vaguely, my place in the family, which would mean some of my people go with me and some don't, and the ones that don't would be in danger, and I'd have to get them out of the country. And then eventually, probably within a year, somebody in my father's circle or in one of the other families would decide I was a loose end, and they'd send somebody. Atin maute setai. He said it calmly, the way a person talks about a surgery they'd already scheduled. And you would still do it, Aria said. I would still do it. Why? I told you why. Tell me again. Without the speech. Without the mother. Without the principal. Just why? He looked at her a long moment. Because, he said finally, last night you sat in my library and you told me I was saying the same sentence my uncles said in a different mouth. And nobody in my entire life has ever told me the truth to my face like that. My soldiers don't. My friends don't. My own father doesn't. And I realized halfway through that sentence, you were the first person I'd met in maybe 10 years who I wanted to be a better man in front of. His jaw worked. That's not your responsibility. I know that. I'm not asking you to carry it. I'm answering your question. The wind tore at her braid. Somewhere above them, a gull cried. Aria did not say anything for a long time. She could not immediately have formed words. Finally, she said, "We should go back up. My hands are freezing." "Yeah." He didn't move. "Kael," she said. "Yeah." "I'm not." She looked at the sand. "I'm not going to decide today. Or tomorrow. I don't know how long it's going to take." "I know. And I might decide to leave." "I know." "Okay." She turned and started walking back toward the path. He fell in beside her. Neither of them spoke the whole way up. But halfway up the switchback, she stumbled again on a loose rock. And this time, when his hand went out instinctively, he did not pull it back. And this time, she did not pull away either. His fingers closed briefly around her elbow, steadied her, and then let go. It lasted maybe a second. She thought about it for the rest of the walk. Well, that night she could not sleep again, but for a different reason. She lay in the dark listening to the ocean. She thought about her mother at a piano. She thought about Kael's mother in a wing of this house she had not yet seen. She thought about her father's face, and about Benny standing in the rain saying, "Be good," and about the letter in her pocket, and about the way Kael had said a better man in front of, like it had cost him something to admit. She thought about the fact that she had raised her voice at a Moretti and was still alive. She thought about the fact that she had wanted to raise her voice, that somewhere between the library last night and the beach this afternoon, a small, dry thing in her chest that she had thought long dead had started, tentatively, to make noise. She pulled the letter out from under the pillow where she had moved it when she changed clothes. She read it again in the dim blue light from the window. "Nobody here is going to ask you where you're going." She pressed the paper to her lips just for a second. Not a kiss, just the contact of it against her mouth. A small private gesture no one would ever know about. Then she tucked the letter back under the pillow and turned on her side and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long, long time, she fell asleep thinking not about what would be done to her, but about what she might do. The next 3 days went like that. Mornings she spent alone. The staff had quietly arranged the house around her, she realized. Breakfast appeared wherever she went. The fire in the morning room was always lit. The library was always empty when she came in and somehow occupied when she didn't want it to be. She never caught anyone watching her. That was the trick of the place. She had grown up in a house where everyone was always watching her, and the Moretti estate had turned it inside out. Here, she could disappear for 4 hours into the library with a book she had pulled off the shelf at random, a worn paperback of short stories by a writer she had never heard of, and no one came to find her. Once, around 1 in the afternoon, she had stood up to stretch and found a tray outside the door with a bowl of soup and a piece of bread on it. No note, no knock. Just soup. As if the house had gently reminded itself that she existed and then left her alone again. In the afternoons, Kael came looking for her, not in a pressing way. He would appear in a doorway, say, "There's light in the studio if you want to see it," or "I'm going to the stables, do you want to come?" and wait for her answer with the same careful distance he'd held in the library. Sometimes she said yes, sometimes she said no. The first time she said no, he had simply nodded and said, "Okay, tomorrow maybe," and walked away. And she had sat in the morning room for a long time afterward, testing the inside of herself for the usual aftermath of having refused a man: the tight chest, the nausea, the waiting for a door to slam somewhere in the house, and had found, to her confusion, nothing. Just quiet. Just the fire. The studio was on the second floor of the East Wing. It had belonged, he told her, to his mother, back when she was still painting. 2 of the walls were windows. The other 2 were hung with canvases. Abstract work, bold colors, nothing like what Aria would have expected from the woman Kael had described. There was an easel in the center of the room, covered with a sheet. There were stacks of stretched canvases against the wall. There was a cabinet full of tubes of paint, brushes in jars, a palette stiff with dried color. "She said I could give these away if anyone ever wanted them," Kael said, standing in the doorway. She stopped being able to, I don't know, look at them, I think. They reminded her of something, but she didn't want them thrown out. Aria walked slowly through the room. She stopped in front of one canvas, a deep blue field with a single white stroke across it, like a wave or a knife cut. "I used to draw," she said. "Yeah?" "When I was little, my mother used to buy me these cheap sketchbooks at the drugstore. I'd fill them up. I haven't—" She shrugged. "My uncle threw them all out after she died. He said I was old enough to stop playing." "How old were you?" 12. Kael was quiet a moment. Then he said, "The cabinet's full of supplies. If you ever want them, nobody would touch it." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the cabinet. She looked at the blue and white canvas. She thought about the feeling of a pencil in her hand, and how long ago that had been, and how it had been one of the only things that had ever felt entirely like hers. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe is fine." On the 4th day, she painted. She did it in the middle of the afternoon when the light through the studio windows was coming in long gold bars across the floor. She did not tell anyone. She just went up there after lunch with a cup of tea and found herself standing in front of the cabinet, and the next thing she knew, she was squeezing out a blob of titanium white onto the palette, and then ultramarine, and then a color she didn't know the name of. A deep, almost black green that had called to her from the row of tubes. She painted badly. That surprised her. Her hands had forgotten more than she'd thought. The canvas she had pulled out was too big. The first strokes went on heavy and wrong, and she nearly stopped. But she didn't stop. She painted for 2 hours. She painted her father's house, which she had not meant to paint, the narrow brownstone front, the window of the kitchen, the shape of a woman behind the glass, blurred by rain, that might have been her mother or might have been herself. When she stepped back from the canvas, she was shaking a little, and her hands were streaked with green and blue to the wrists, and she realized she had been holding her breath, off and on, for most of the 2 hours. She did not hear the door open behind her. "Oh," Kael said quietly. She turned sharply. He was in the doorway. He was holding a mug in each hand. She understood a second later that he'd brought her fresh tea. He looked at the canvas over her shoulder. He did not step into the room. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have knocked." "It's okay. I didn't know you—" He stopped. He looked at the painting again. His face did something complicated. "I didn't know you were— I just saw the door open." She looked at the painting with him. "It's not very good," she said. "I don't know anything about painting." "It's not." "Okay." He stayed in the doorway. He did not come in. After a moment, he held up one of the mugs. "Tea, if you want it. I'll leave it on the little table by the door. I'm not going to— I don't want to intrude." He set the mug down. He was about to go. "Kael?" He stopped. Aria turned fully to face him. Her hands, streaked with paint, were trembling, but not from fear this time. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. "You can come in," she said. "If you want." He looked at her. "Are you sure?" "No." A small, crooked smile. "Okay, then I'll stand right here, halfway. How's that?" "That's good." He leaned in the doorway, arms folded, and he looked at her painting for a long time. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't say it was beautiful. He didn't say it was bad. He just looked at it, and at her, and back at it, and she understood that he was doing the one thing she had never in her life been allowed. He was simply letting it exist without needing to tell her what it was. "Your mother," he said finally. "Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah." The sun through the windows had gone from gold to orange. Somewhere in the east wing of the house, the old clock chimed the hour. Aria stood there with paint on her hands in a dead woman's studio, and a man who had been raised to own her stood halfway across a threshold because she had asked him to. And in that thin, ordinary moment, something in her, something that had been folded small for 18 years, unfolded an inch. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. But when she eventually walked over to the doorway to take the mug of tea, she stopped a foot in front of him. Not to hand him anything, not to say anything, just to stand there, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of the stables still on his shirt, close enough that he had to look down at her. She looked up at him. She did not touch him. He did not touch her. They stood like that for a breath, for two. Then Aria said very quietly, "The weekend's tomorrow." "I know. I haven't decided. I know. But I want you to know—" Her voice cracked a little, and she hated that, and she kept going anyway. "I want you to know that I am thinking about staying. I'm not saying I will, but I am thinking about it. That's not nothing. For me, that's not nothing." Kael's face did something she would think about for a long time afterward. A small, sharp, almost pain thing, quickly gotten under control. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been all week. "Okay, thank you." She stepped around him into the corridor and went back to her room. She did not see him again that night. And when she got into bed and turned out the light, she lay in the dark and she noticed, with a strange, unfamiliar ache under her ribs, that the question keeping her awake was no longer "what is he going to do to me?" It was something much more dangerous. It was "what am I going to let myself want?" She slept deeper that night than she had in years. She did not dream. When she woke, the sun was already high, and she lay there for a long time before she realized what was strange about the morning. It was the absence of dread. For as long as she could remember, waking up had been a small ritual of bracing, a quick inventory of whose voice was in the hall, whose mood would set the temperature of the day, what she had or had not done the night before that might require some new form of folding. That morning, she lay under the heavy quilt and listened to the distant sound of water somewhere in the walls, and to a woman's voice humming tunelessly down in the kitchen, and her chest did not tighten once. It was such a small thing. It scared her a little. She got up. She pulled on a different dress from the suitcase, a dark green one, older, worn at the cuffs. Not the kind of dress her father would have approved for meeting a man at breakfast. She looked at herself in the mirror for a second with it on, and she thought, "I am not going to ask permission to wear this." It was a very small rebellion. She let it carry her down the stairs. Kael was not at breakfast. Mrs. Calvano appeared in the doorway as Aria was pouring her coffee. "He asked me to say he's on a call this morning, miss. Business. He'll be finished around 11. "Oh, all right." The housekeeper hesitated. There was something in her face, a thin, folded worry that hadn't been there the day before. "Is something wrong?" Aria asked. No, nothing's wrong." "Mrs. Calvano." The older woman smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her apron. "His father called this morning, miss. Early, before you came down. It was—" She hesitated again. "A long call. That's all." Aria set the coffee pot down. "About me?" "I wouldn't know, miss." It was a polite lie. They both heard it. Mrs. Calvano's mouth pressed into its small, careful line. "I shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry. Please, eat. He wanted you to have a nice morning." "Okay." The housekeeper hovered another moment and then left. Aria ate her toast. It tasted like nothing. The good feeling of the morning had gone thin at the edges, and in its place was the old, familiar hum, the low-frequency anxiety of being once again a piece on someone else's board. A long call. She could imagine it perfectly. She could hear Giovanni Moretti's voice without ever having heard it. She could imagine the exact shape of the words. "Is the Voss girl still in the house? When is the wedding? What are you playing at?" She could imagine, too, the voice on the other end of the line. Kael's, steady, low, the voice he had used in the library, and she did not know suddenly whether to trust the steadiness of it. She tried to eat more. She gave up. By 10:30, she could not sit still anymore. She took the book she had been reading and went out through the south terrace doors. She did not go down to the water. She walked the perimeter of the upper lawn instead, along the stone wall that divided the estate from the cliff edge, and she tried to read, and she did not read. She kept looking up at the house. She kept looking at the narrow, tall window on the second floor that she'd decided was his study, even though she'd never been in it. The window was lit. Someone was pacing behind it. She could see the shape moving through the curtain. She thought about her father. She thought about whether he had already been told, whether a car was already on its way up the coast. She thought about Benny in the rain saying, "Be good," and she wondered what be good was going to look like when she told her own father, through whatever phone she could get her hands on, that she was not getting married at the end of the week. She was so deep in all of that she did not hear the footsteps on the gravel behind her until they were close. "Miss Voss!" She turned sharply. It was not Kael. It was a guard. One she had seen a few times in passing, a tall, thin man in his 40s with a narrow face and very pale eyes. He was wearing a dark suit, no coat, and he was standing a few feet back, his hands folded in front of him in the way trained men stand when they want you to know they are being polite and could stop. "Yes," she said. "Mr. Moretti asked me to find you. He'd like to see you in the library. At your convenience." At your convenience. The formality of it landed badly. "Thank you." She walked back to the house with the guard 2 steps behind her. He did not speak again. She was very aware of the sound of his shoes on the gravel. The library smelled different this time. It took her a moment to place it. Cigarette smoke. Stale. Not fresh. Someone had smoked in there hours ago, and it had settled into the curtains. Kael, she had already worked out, did not smoke. His father did. The smell told her, before she saw his face, that Giovanni had been in the house that morning, or that he might as well have been, that the long call had come through the room like a physical presence and left its mark. Kael was at the window again, back to her, the way he had been the first night. The difference was the shoulders. That first night his shoulders had been still, almost deliberately still. This morning they were set in a hard line, and when he turned at the sound of her step, she saw that his jaw had the same tension. "Aria." "Kael." "Thank you for coming in. Please. Sit." He gestured at the armchair. She sat this time without arguing. The fire was not lit. The room was colder than she'd known it could be. He did not sit. He stayed standing. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, the way a man does when he is trying to get blood back into tight muscle. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need to tell you now before the next phone call, because I'm—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'm not going to be one more man who lets you find this out the wrong way." Her stomach dropped. "Okay," she said, because she could not say anything else. He came around the desk. He did not sit in the chair across from her the way he had the first night. He pulled up the straight-back chair from near the window instead, and sat down on the edge of it, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He was looking at the rug between them. He was gathering something. "My father called at 7 this morning," he said. "Mrs. Calvano told me." "Of course she did." A small, humorless breath. "Okay." "So he called. He wanted to know if the wedding was happening on schedule. I told him the arrangement had changed. I told him you'd be making the decision at the end of the week and that I was honoring that. And he lost his temper, which I expected, and then, which I didn't expect, he started throwing things at me. Not objects. Sentences." His hands tightened on each other. He said, "You've been sloppy about this girl, Kael. If she walks out of that house, it's not just the Voss deal you've broken. It's 6 years of my planning." Aria's brow drew down. 6 years. "Yeah, I'm 18. I know. The deal is 2 years old. The arrangement, the truce. That's what my father told me." "I know," Kael said again. Quieter. She looked at him. He was still looking at the rug. His jaw was working. "Kael," she said. Her voice sounded tight in her own ears. "What does 6 years mean?" He drew in a long breath. He let it out. He looked up at her finally, and his eyes were the tired, dark eyes from the first night, except worse. "It means," he said, That my father has been having you watched since you were 12 years old. The room tilted. It didn't literally tilt. She knew that. It was something in her inner ear, something in the lining of her stomach, a swoop like the floor of an elevator dropping an inch. She set her hands very carefully on the arms of the chair to be sure she was still sitting up. "What?" she said. It came out too soft. She tried again. "Say that again." "My father has had men watching your family since you were 12. Not for anything that would have hurt you directly. Photographs. Reports. Where you went to school, which friends you had, which teachers you liked, which boys your uncles threatened. Whether you read, whether you played music, whether you were..." His voice caught for half a second. "Whether you were healthy, whether you were strong, whether you were going to survive your own family long enough to be useful." She could hear her own breathing. It was louder than anything else in the room. "Useful," she said. "Aria? Useful for what, Kael? For marriage, for an alliance, for..." He made a useless gesture. "For any of a dozen scenarios he was running on the long game. I didn't know the specifics. I swear to... I didn't know. But when the truce came 2 years ago, and he said, 'We'll take his daughter,' I understood later that he had already done the math on you. Years in advance, he knew more about you walking into that deal than Donato did. He'd been investing in knowing you since before you were out of middle school. The fire was not lit, but she was cold anyway. A different cold. The cold of a kind of rage she did not yet know how to hold, because it was bigger than her body. 'And you,' she said." Kael did not look away. To his credit, to his eternal credit, he did not look away. "I didn't initiate it. I was 15 when it started. I didn't learn about it until I was 19. My father, he sat me down and he showed me a file. A physical file. Folder like any other. Photos, academic records, transcripts, a psychologist's report on your coping behaviors after your mother died. Coping behaviors, that was the exact phrase. Your name was on the front of the folder. I was 19. I had never met you. You said you saw me at the benefit. That was a year later. I'd seen photos first, the folder first. When I saw you across the room at the benefit, I already knew who you were. I knew your hands. I knew how you stood. I knew what you looked like when you thought no one was looking at you. Because your father had made sure someone was always looking at me. Yes. She felt the tears come before she understood she was crying. They were not loud tears. They ran down her face and she did not wipe them. She was staring at him. She could not stop staring at him. "And you kept that," she said. "You kept that file. You kept that information. You saw me across the room and you knew things about me I had not given you, and you did not tell me. And you sat in this library 6 nights ago and you said, 'I chose you years ago,' and you left that part out. Yes. You let me eat a sandwich Mrs. Calvano brought me, and you let me play a piano, and you walked me down to the beach, and you told me about your mother, and you stood halfway in a doorway yesterday while I painted. And the entire time, Kael, I didn't know that you had read my 12-year-old school reports. I didn't read them. I saw them. I saw the folder. I closed it. I walked out of my father's office. I'm not trying to split that hair to get off the hook. I'm telling you what happened. But yes, I knew it existed. I knew what was in it in general, and I didn't tell you. Why? Because I thought..." He stopped. He looked down. "Because I thought if I told you on the first night, you would walk out and never come back. And because after the second day, I thought if I could just give you long enough here to see who I actually was, apart from all of that, you would have gotten away with it. Yes." His voice was raw. "Yes. That is what I wanted. I wanted to get away with it. You're right." She was shaking. Her hands were shaking on the arms of the chair. "Get out," she said. "Aria, get out of the room. Please. Get out." She had not raised her voice like that in her life. The word tore her throat. Kael flinched, actually flinched, the small, full-body flinch of a man who has just been hit, and stood up. He did not argue. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. "I will be wherever you want me to be," he said, without turning around. "If you want to leave today, I will take you. If you want me to stay away from you, I will stay away. If you want to hit me, you can. I mean that. I will stand in this room and I will let you do it. I have never meant anything I've said to you more. Get out! He got out. The door closed behind him. She sat there for a long time. She was aware distantly of her own breathing. It was fast and shallow, the kind of breathing her mother used to have at the end in the hospital bed when the nurses would come in and adjust the oxygen. Aria put her face in her hands, and she did not make a sound. She did not scream. She had spent 18 years learning not to scream, and the training held even now, which she hated, because some part of her wanted to put her fist through the glass of the library window and see if the sound would make her feel better. She thought, very clearly, through the shaking, about her 12-year-old self. She thought about this girl she had been at 12. Her mother had still been alive that year, though already sick. Aria had still been sleeping with a stuffed rabbit. She had still been afraid of the basement. She had cried for a week after her pet goldfish died. She had loved a boy in her class named Anthony, whose family had moved to Florida, and she had wept for that too, secretly, under her pillow because she wasn't allowed to be seen crying. She had been a child, and somewhere, in some office, in some file cabinet, a man she had never met had begun a folder with her photograph on it, her whole adolescence, her whole becoming, coping behaviors. She made a sound then, a small, cracked sound, and she put her hand over her mouth to stop it, and she bent forward over her own knees in the chair. She did not know how long she sat like that. At some point, Mrs. Calvano knocked, very softly, and said through the door, "Miss, can I bring you anything?" "No. I could sit with you." "No, thank you. No." A pause. "I'm in the kitchen, dear. If you change your mind." The footsteps went away. Aria straightened up. She did not go to lunch. She did not leave the library for almost 2 hours. When she finally did, she went straight through the house and up the stairs to her room, and she locked the door from the inside, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she looked at her suitcase. She could leave. He had said she could. Today, right now, if she wanted. He had said it twice. "I will take you." She could be in her father's brownstone by dinner. She could be back in the small life she had been built for. She could never see this house again. She could spend the rest of her life in Queens being handed to someone her father picked next, someone easier, someone who had not watched her. Except that was not actually a solution. Her father, learning she had walked away from Giovanni Moretti's son, would not put her in a convent. He would put her in a marriage faster. He would pick a man who could not be refused. The Moretti folder was a horror, but it was only one folder. Her own father's ambitions were their own folder, and she had been reading that one since she was born. She stood up, she paced, she pressed her palms to her face, she sat back down. Somewhere inside her, under the shock, she noticed something else, and it horrified her almost more than the revelation itself. She was not surprised, not truly. She was devastated, yes. She was angry enough to shake. But at the base of her, in the old place where she had always kept her clearest understanding of the world, there was a small, quiet voice that had said, of course, the moment Kyle had said 12 years old. Of course. Of course men in their world did this. Of course a man like Giovanni Moretti had been running the long game for decades. Of course the truce had not been the beginning of anything. The truce had been the end of a play he had been staging since she was in 6th grade. What she was grieving for, she realized, was not her illusions about Giovanni. It was her illusions about the last 6 days. She had let herself believe, slowly, against her own training, that something in this house had been new. That she had been new here. Kyle opening the library door a week ago. Kyle saying you don't have to pretend. The sandwich in her room, the piano, the studio, the letter in her pocket. She had started, without permission and without planning, to think of this place as a door rather than a cage. And she had let her face show it yesterday in the studio, standing a foot from him with paint on her hands, saying, "I am thinking about staying." He had let her say that, knowing that was the knife. He had not been the one to put her in the folder. She believed him about that. But he had walked into that library 6 nights ago carrying every page of it inside his head, and he had chosen not to tell her, and he had let her stand in a doorway and say, "I am thinking about staying," while he carried it. And the difference between those two men, the one who did the watching and the one who had simply known about it, was, at this moment, smaller than she could bear. She lay down on the bed on her side, still in the green dress. She stared at the window. She did not cry anymore. She was out of that, for now. She felt hollow and a little cold and very awake. She thought, I am going to have to think. I am going to have to think harder than I have ever thought in my life. And under that she thought, I will not think it today. She pulled the quilt up over herself, shoes and all, and she closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She did not cry. She simply lay there in the dim afternoon light of a room that did not belong to her, in a house that did not belong to her, in a life that she was beginning to understand had never actually belonged to her. And the only thing she was sure of, the only thing, was that whatever happened next, it was going to be the first thing in her entire 18 years that would have her name on it, and hers alone. She woke at dusk to a soft knock. Not Mrs. Calvano's knock. Different, harder. 3 short raps. She did not answer. Aria, his voice, low, tight. I'm not coming in, he said through the door. I need to tell you something. Through the door is fine. I wanted you to hear it from me, not from Teresa, not from anyone else. There's a situation. She sat up. Her head was pounding. The room was dim. She had slept longer than she'd meant to. What kind of situation? She said. Your father called the house 10 minutes ago. He knows about the delay. He knows you're still here and the wedding isn't happening tomorrow. Somebody in my father's organization told him. I don't know who yet. I will. A pause. He is on his way up. He's bringing 4 men. He'll be here in about an hour. She put her feet on the floor. He's angry, Cale said. Aria, he's not just angry. He's scared. I've been on the phone with people for the last hour. There's been movement from the Iannucci family on the docks. Somebody's using the chaos of us, to make a play. Somebody fed your father something. He thinks I'm playing him. He thinks the delay is a trap. He thinks I'm... Another pause. He thinks I'm doing something to you. Great, she said. Her voice was flat. Wonderful. I know. Am I a prisoner now, KL? Because of the time of day it is, can I still walk out the front door if I want to? Yes, right now. Absolutely. I'll have a car at the gate in 10 minutes. You can be out of the house before he arrives. I'll call him. I'll explain. I'll handle it. With what? With your winning personality. A beat. Fair, he said, with whatever it takes. Let me guess. That's your problem? Yes. She closed her eyes. She sat there in the dark for a minute. Open the door, she said finally. Are you sure? Open it. She heard the handle turn. He did not step into the room. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall sconce. His face was in shadow, but she could see the set of his shoulders, tight, braced, like a man waiting to be hit. She looked at him. She was going to say something. She did not entirely know what. Her mouth opened. And then, far off, through the house, they both heard it. A car on the gravel. Fast. Cale's head turned sharply. He's early, he said. Or he wasn't as far as he said. Or that. Her heart was beating in her throat. For a second, all the rage of the afternoon ran out of her body like water, and what was left was something much older and much smaller, the flat animal understanding of her childhood, which was that her father was in the driveway and she had done something wrong. Kael must have seen it on her face. He stepped into the doorway, not into the room, still outside the line, and he said fast and low, "Listen to me. Listen. I'm listening. You don't owe me a thing, not after today. I know that. But in the next hour, there are going to be men in this house who are going to try to decide what happens to you, and I am asking you, only asking, don't let them. Whatever you decide at the end of that hour, let it be your decision. If you want to leave with him, leave with him. If you want to stay, stay. If you want to stand in the middle of the foyer and scream at both of us until your father's driver takes you to a bus station in the next town, I will drive you to the station myself. But please, please, Aria, walk down those stairs tonight like a person who is choosing, not like a girl who was picked up. Because if you don't, they'll do what they've always done, and I will lose the only fight in this house that I have ever cared about winning. What? She stared at him. Downstairs, a door slammed. Voices. Her father's voice raised. She felt it in her chest before she heard it clearly. the specific register of Donato Voss when he had not been kept waiting and was about to become a problem. Kael didn't move. He was waiting for her. Aria stood up. She walked over to the mirror on the bureau. She looked at herself. The green dress, the unbraided hair, the paint she hadn't fully gotten out from under her nails. She did not look like the girl her father had handed over a week ago. She did not look like the girl in a folder. She looked like someone she was still becoming, and whose name she had not yet fully learned. She did not braid her hair. "Okay," she said quietly, to the mirror, to Kael, to herself. "Okay." She walked past him into the hall. He did not follow her for the first few steps. He let her go ahead. A small thing. She noticed it. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. Her father was in the foyer. She could see him through the balustrade. He had not taken off his coat. Behind him stood two of his men, their hands empty but ready. A third was still outside on the porch. Giovanni Moretti's guards, her guards, she supposed now, for the first time, had not quite stepped between them, but they were standing in the doorway of the front hall in a way that said they could. It was the quiet before a thing. Her father looked up and saw her. His face, for one brief second, did something she had not seen on it since her mother had been alive. Relief. A small, raw relief. The relief of a father who has been told on the drive up that his daughter may have been hurt, and who is seeing, right now, that she is upright, intact, walking on her own. Then his eyes traveled to Kael at the top of the stairs behind her, and the relief hardened into something else. "Aria?" her father said. His voice carried up the stairs. "Come down here. We're leaving." She did not move. "Aria." "Hello, Dad," she said. The foyer went very quiet. Her father's head tilted about half an inch. He was used, she thought distantly, to a certain cadence in her voice. The cadence of "Yes, Dad." "Okay, Dad." "Right away, Dad." The cadence she had just not used. "What did you say?" he said. "I said hello." She walked down the first step, then the second. Her hand rested lightly on the banister. She was aware of her heart. She was aware of the way the air had changed in the room. She was aware of Kael, 2 steps behind her, not close, not crowding. A presence, nothing more, and somehow all the presence in the world. Halfway down the stairs, she stopped. She looked down at her father and at his men, and at the foyer of a house she had not asked to enter a week ago, and at the long, dark, open door of a choice she had not known, until this moment, she was going to be able to make. "Before anyone says anything else," she said, to the foyer, to all of them, in a voice that did not shake, "I want to be the one who talks first. I think I have earned that tonight, and I think all of you." Her eyes moved across them, her father, the men, up and back to Kael, and back to her father. "All of you are going to listen to me, for the first time in my life. You are going to listen." Nobody spoke. The fire in the foyer hearth popped once in the silence. A log settled. Aria Voss took another step down. She took the step, and then another, and she was aware of every muscle in her legs. Her hand slid along the banister, not because she needed the support, but because letting go felt too much like flight, and she had decided, somewhere in the last 2 hours, though she could not have pinpointed when, that she was not going to run. Not tonight, not ever again, if she could help it. Her father's face had gone still. He had a face that could go very still when he was calculating, and she had seen that face across the dinner table 1,000 times without ever being on the receiving end of it. It was different from the other side. "Aria," he said, "I don't know what they've done to you. I don't know what they've told you, but you're coming home tonight, and we're going to sort this out at the house. This is not the place." "This is the place," she said. "Aria." "Dad, please, let me finish. You can say whatever you need to say after. I promise. I will sit and I will listen. But right now it is my turn." Donato Voss did not answer. He did not shut his daughter up. That itself, that 1-second hesitation, was a crack in the wall of her life so loud she almost missed the next breath. He was looking at her with his head tilted slightly, the way a man looks at a piece of news he has not yet decided whether to believe. Behind him, his 2 men had gone very still, in the careful way soldiers go still when they are no longer certain whose call this is. She came down the last step slowly, so that she ended at the bottom of the staircase, one hand still on the post, facing him across 15 feet of foyer. I know about the folder, she said. Her father's brow moved. Only a fraction, but it moved. Folder, he said. Don't. She watched him, the narrow, tired, familiar face she had studied all her life. And she watched him decide in a single heartbeat not to insult her by pretending he didn't know what she was talking about. That too was new. He did not play stupid with her. He had always played stupid with her. It was one of the primary modes of their relationship, the way he kept her a child whether she was one or not. Tonight, for whatever reason, maybe because she had come down the stairs without being called, maybe because she had used his name, he did not reach for it. That was Giovanni's, he said, not mine. I wasn't involved in that. Did you know? A pause. Yes. The foyer rang with that small syllable. Aria felt it go through her like a cold wire. When? 4 years ago. 4 years, she repeated. You let that man put a folder on your 12-year-old daughter, and you found out 4 years ago, and you… What, Dad? You what? You wrote him a thank you note. I was at war with him, Aria. I was 14 when you found out. It came out quieter than anything else he had said. It was not a justification. It was a statement. He was looking at her steadily now, and there was no pretense left in his face, and what was left was something she had not seen there before, a kind of exhausted honesty that was almost worse than the lies. When I made the truce, he said, I knew what Giovanni had been doing. I knew that he had that folder, and I used it. I told him I knew. I told him that unless he gave us favorable terms on the docks, unless he pulled his people off the trucking routes, I was going to make the folder a problem. Public or private, I didn't say. He knew what I meant. He gave me the terms. That's how we got the truce, Aria. That's how your uncles are still breathing. I traded on it. She stared at him. And then you gave me to his son, she said. Yes. Dad. Yes. That was part of the deal too. I'm not pretending it wasn't. He wanted you in this house. He'd wanted it for years. It was the one thing he wouldn't come off of, no matter what I had on him. I took it. I thought… His jaw flexed, and for a moment she could see the man behind the face, the one who had loved her mother, who had held Aria on his lap at 7 and told her that the window in the kitchen was hers to watch from. I thought at least it would be the son. The son is not the father. That was the one thing I heard about the kid, from everybody. The son is not the father. I thought it was the best deal I was going to get for you. I thought… Stop saying you thought. Okay. You didn't think, Dad. You calculated. There's a difference. You calculated my life. You used a folder on your daughter the way you use a folder on a stevedore. Her voice was climbing. She let it. You are angry with him for watching me, but you used what he saw. You ate at the same table with the thing. Her father did not speak. And don't… Her voice cracked and she pushed through it. Don't tell me it was for my uncle's lives. Don't put that on me. I don't want that debt. I didn't ask for that debt. You made a choice that you could live with, and you dressed it up as love, and you sent me here in a car with Benny and a suitcase, and the whole way up here Benny told me he's not like his old man because even Benny could not look me in the eye about what we all knew you were doing. Aria, I'm not done. She took a long breath. Her chest was burning. She was aware distantly of Kael still at the top of the stairs, silent, and of Giovanni's men in the doorway, silent, and of her father's men behind him, silent, and of Mrs. Calvano somewhere in the shadow of the corridor, silent. A room full of silent men, and one woman with a dish towel pressed to her mouth in the dark of a hall. The whole house was listening. You don't get to rescue me from him tonight, Aria said, quieter now, because you were not rescuing me when it counted. He was watching me. You knew. You let him keep watching me. You traded on it. You handed me to his son and you told me to be good. You do not get to drive up here 4 years later and pretend you are the one getting me out of a burning building, Dad. You and Giovanni lit the building, the two of you, together. Donato Voss closed his eyes for one long second. When he opened them, they were wet. She had seen her father's eyes wet exactly once before in her life, and that had been in the hospital the morning her mother died, and he had blinked it away so fast that she had almost convinced herself she hadn't seen it. He didn't blink now. He let her see it. It was not an apology exactly. It was, she understood dimly, the closest thing he had in him. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "I want you to go home," she said. "I want you to go home, and I want you not to send anyone back up this road for a long time. I want you to let me make this decision by myself, without cars in the driveway, without calls to the house, without messages through Benny. I will talk to you when I am ready. I don't know when that will be. It might be a long time. It might not ever. I don't know yet. But it is not going to be tonight, and it is not going to be a week from now because you decided." Her father's jaw worked. "And him," he said. His eyes went up, past her, to Kyle at the top of the stairs. "That's a separate fight," she said. "You don't get to have that one for me either. Aria, this kid, don't. This kid knew what his father did to you since he was a teenager, and he didn't tell you. I know that. How is that any better than what I did?" "It isn't," Aria said, and her voice came out raw, and for a moment she was surprised by her own steadiness. "It isn't. That's what I've been sitting in a locked room thinking about for the last 4 hours. It isn't better, Dad. You're right. It is a version of the same thing, and that is why I am going to be the one who deals with it. Not you. Not with 4 men in a car in the driveway. Not with your hand on the back of my neck walking me out of this house. Me. And him. In a room. With our own mouths." Her father let out a long, hard breath through his nose. "He's going to hurt you." "You hurt me." It landed flat in the foyer. Nobody moved. "You hurt me, Dad," she said again. And she was crying now, quietly, without sound, the tears just running. "You hurt me every day for 10 years, and you told yourself it was discipline, and you told yourself it was the life, and you told yourself you had no choice. Everybody in this room tonight has told themselves they had no choice. I'm the only one who didn't have a choice. I was 12. I was 14. I was 18 last week. So tonight, for once, I'm taking one. And none of you." Her eyes went across them. Her father's men, Giovanni's men, the housekeeper in the shadow, Kale on the stairs. "None of you are going to take it from me. You can all stand there and watch me take it. That's all you get to do tonight. Watch." For a long moment there was nothing in the foyer but the fire crackling in the hearth. Then her father, Donato Voss, who did not bend, who had not bent, who had not been told no by a woman in his own house since his wife stopped speaking, nodded once. A small, sharp nod, like a man acknowledging an injury in the field. "All right," he said. "All right? All right." His voice was hoarse. "I'll go. Tonight. I'll go. Thank you. Aria. Dad, just..." His throat worked. He did not know how to end the sentence. He was a man who had never in his life had to end a sentence softly. He tried again. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to go home without you and not do anything. I don't know how that works." "It works," she said, "by getting in the car." He nodded. He nodded again. He looked, for the first time in her life, smaller than he was. "Call the house," he said. "Well, please, when you can, any time, even if it's just to say you're alive. Your mother..." He stopped. He looked at the floor. "Your mother would have wanted me to say that. Call the house." "I will call when I can." "Okay. Good night, Dad. Aria." "Good night." He looked at her a second longer. Then he turned around and he walked out the front door of the Moretti estate, and his men went with him, and the door closed behind them, and the sound of it was the smallest soft click she had ever heard a heavy door make. Her knees went, not dramatically, not all the way. It was more that the bottom step of the staircase, which she had been standing in front of, suddenly seemed like the right and only place to sit down. And she sat down on it hard, and she put her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands, and she shook. She did not cry harder. She had been crying the whole time. She was out of any new crying. She just shook and breathed and waited for her body to believe that the foyer had emptied. Somewhere behind her, she heard the stair creak. "If you want me to go," Kyle said from a few steps up, "I'll go." "Don't go," she said into her hands. He did not come down the rest of the stairs. He sat where he was. She could feel it. the careful, decided weight of a man choosing not to cross a distance. It made something in her ribs ease, just a fraction. Mrs. Calvano came around the corner from the corridor with a blanket and did not say a word. She put the blanket around Aria's shoulders. She squeezed her upper arm once. She disappeared again toward the kitchen. A minute later, there was the faint sound of a kettle. Aria lifted her face. She did not wipe it. Her hands were shaking so badly she did not trust herself to go near her own eyes. "Kael," she said. "Yeah." "Come down." He came down. He sat, finally, 2 steps above her, not beside her, because beside her would have been presumptuous. She was grateful for that. He rested his forearms on his knees. She could see his hands out of the corner of her eye. They were shaking too, she noticed, just slightly, just at the tips. They sat like that for a long time. "I meant it," he said eventually. "Meant what?" "That you could hit me." She let out a sound that was almost a laugh. It was a wet, cracked, exhausted thing. "Kael, I did. I'm not going to hit you. Okay?" I considered it. "Okay." Another long silence. The fire popped. Mrs. Calvano, somewhere deep in the house, was opening and closing a cupboard very, very quietly, the way a person does when they are trying to move around other people's grief without disturbing it. "I want to say something to you," Aria said, "and I want you to not say anything back for a minute because I'm going to need every bit of my steam to get through it, and if you interrupt, I will lose it. Okay? I mean it. Not one word." "Not one word." She took a breath. "I don't know," she said. "If I can stay." He did not move. "I woke up this morning," she said, "and for the first time in my whole life, I got out of bed without being afraid of the day. I put on this dress because I wanted to. I didn't ask anyone. I drank a cup of coffee by myself, and nobody told me I had to sit a certain way. I thought, he will be at the table at 11, and I will tell him that I'm thinking about staying. That was my whole plan. That was the entire plan of my entire day, Kyle. And I'm telling you that because I want you to understand exactly what it was in me that died this afternoon when you told me about the folder." He did not speak. He had promised not to. "Because," she said, "you didn't just take something from me. You took a thing I had just this week figured out existed. Do you understand? You took my first morning of she couldn't find the word and had to try twice, of wanting a day. I had that for about 6 hours. And then you sat me in a chair in the library and you gave me the folder." She stopped. She breathed. "I want to tell you that I hate you," she said. "I thought I would. When I was sitting in the library alone after, I thought, this is the moment where I hate him. But I didn't. I don't. And that's not because you don't deserve it. It's because somewhere in between your father making a file on me and me walking down those stairs tonight, I stopped. I stopped being the kind of person who can hate neatly. I can't do it. I look at you and I see the man who stood in the doorway of the studio yesterday and watched me paint without telling me what I was doing wrong. And I also see the man who watched me paint knowing that his father had a report somewhere about my coping behaviors. And both of those men are you. And I don't know how to cut them apart." He said nothing. His hands were still shaking. "So here's what I'm going to do," she said. "I'm going to stay in this house for one more night. Not because I have decided anything, because I don't have anywhere else to go tonight that isn't a worse lie than this one. I'm going to sleep in the room upstairs, and I'm going to lock the door. In the morning, you and I are going to sit in the library, and we are going to talk about what a person, what a man, who wants to be looked at by me has to do going forward. Not promise me. Do. Because I have been promised things my entire life, Kael, and they are worth less than nothing to me. So, actions, concrete things. A list. Things you will and will not do. Things you will tell me before my father tells me. Things you will never do again. Things you will let me see. A real list with real teeth. If you can sit across from me tomorrow and give me that list and live up to it, I will think about it. I will think about it seriously. I am not promising you anything else." He nodded slowly. "You can talk now," she said. He waited another second, as if to make sure she was really done. "I understand," he said. "That's it?" "That's it. Tomorrow morning, library, real list. I've been writing it in my head for a week, Aria. Some of it since I was 19. I'll have it. Good. A pause. One more thing, she said. Yeah. Your father. His jaw tightened. He's going to come here, she said. Yours. Not mine. Mine just came and left. Yours hasn't been to this house in how long? 6 months. He's going to come here, Kyle. Tomorrow. The day after. Soon. He is not going to sit in his own house and find out through a phone call that I stood in the foyer and told my father to leave. He is going to want to see this for himself. He is going to want to meet the girl who used the word folder in her own voice. He is going to want to handle me. Yes? Yes. You are going to have to decide, she said, whether you stand in front of me or whether you stand beside me or whether you sit down and let me stand by myself. And I don't know which of those 3 things I want from you tomorrow. I don't even know tonight. But Kyle, her voice thinned. If he gets between me and the door, if he starts using the same words on me that he used in that folder, I need you to understand that I'm not going to sit politely through it. I am not the girl who sat politely through things anymore. Something in me has come apart today, and I don't know that it goes back in the same order. So, if you're planning to marry a girl who is a bargaining chip, you need to tell me now. Because that girl is gone, and whoever I am turning into, she is not going to stand still in this house to be inspected. Old. Kyle looked down at the stairs. His hands were still shaking at the fingertips. He took a long breath. He let it out. I don't want the bargaining chip, he said. I never wanted the bargaining chip. I am telling you that knowing I have not earned the right to be believed about what I want. If you want proof, I will give you proof. Starting tomorrow. Starting tonight, if you need it. But I want to say, for the record, in the room, with the fire on, I don't want the girl in the folder. I want whoever is sitting on this stair tonight. Aria closed her eyes. She sat a long time with that. She did not answer it. Finally, she said, okay. Okay? Just okay. Don't read anything into it. I am too tired to hold anything else tonight. Okay. She pushed herself up slowly. The blanket slid from her shoulders. Kyle caught it before it hit the floor and folded it once over his arm. And he stood too, and he did not offer her his hand. I'm going up, she said. Mrs. Calvano has tea. I don't want tea. I'll tell her. She walked past him up the stairs. At the landing, she stopped without turning. Kyle. Yeah. Don't come to my door tonight. Not for anything. I won't. Not even if something else happens. Not even then. Good. She went to her room. She shut the door. She turned the lock. She did not undress. She lay on top of the quilt with her shoes on, and she stared at the ceiling, and she listened to her own breathing, which was at last beginning to slow. She understood distantly that she had just done the largest thing of her life. She had no idea whether she had done it correctly. She fell asleep somewhere around midnight without meaning to. What she did not know, because she was asleep, was that downstairs a second car had come up the drive at 1:30 in the morning without headlights, and that the man who had gotten out of it was not anyone her father had sent, and not anyone Giovanni had sent, and that he had been paid a quiet sum through 3 intermediaries, all of them on the Iannucci payroll, to come up from the city with a specific task, and that the task had been summarized on the single sheet of paper he had been handed earlier that evening in a parking lot as, confirm the girl is in the house, then light the east wing. What she did not know either was that the man had made it as far as the outer wall of the estate before one of Kyle's guards, the tall thin one with the pale eyes, the one who had come to fetch her in the garden that morning, had picked him up on a motion sensor and put him on the ground with a boot on his neck before he could get the first match out of his pocket. What she did not know, because she was still asleep, was that Kyle had come down the stairs in his shirt sleeves at 1:45 and had walked out onto the gravel and had looked at the man lying face down on the wet stone and had said quietly to the guard, "Don't kill him. Tie him up. Put him in the boathouse. Call me at 5. What she did know, when she woke up at 7:30 the next morning to a sky the color of old silver and the smell of rain on the window, was that the light in the hall outside her room had been left on all night. She understood what that meant without anyone having to tell her. It meant that someone had sat in the hall outside her door for some part of the dark hours. Not Kyle. She trusted he had kept his word on the door. Someone else. Mrs. Calvano maybe, or one of the men. Somebody trusted enough to be asked, Somebody who had simply been told, stay there until sunup, no matter what, and had. She lay under the quilt and looked at the thin bar of lamplight under the door, and she thought about how strange it was that in the course of a single day she had been given the worst piece of information of her life, and also, probably, the most stubborn piece of protection. Both from the same house. Both from, in the end, the same man. She thought, this is not going to be simple. She thought, nothing I choose from here is going to be clean. And then, to her own surprise, she thought, quietly, without drama, as one thinks of a thing one has finally understood, I am going to go downstairs and I am going to sit across from him, and I am going to ask for the list. She got out of bed. She washed her face in cold water until the swelling around her eyes went down. She changed out of the green dress, which smelled like yesterday, and into a plain dark one from the suitcase. One her mother had bought her years ago, before the sickness, which Aria had kept even though it no longer fit exactly right. She did not braid her hair. She ran her fingers through it and left it down. It was the smallest possible declaration, and she made it anyway. When she opened the door to the hall, Mrs. Calvano was sitting in a straight-back chair 3 feet away with a rosary in her lap and a thermos of coffee at her feet. The housekeeper's eyes were open. She did not look tired. She had that particular wakefulness of a woman who has sat through worse nights than this in her life and had learned how to make her body wait. "Good morning, miss," Mrs. Calvano said softly. "Mrs. Calvano?" "He's in the library." "For how long?" "Since about 5. Aria nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. "For—" she gestured at the chair. "For sitting." "It's nothing." "It isn't." Mrs. Calvano looked up at her. Her face did the small softening thing again, the one where the worn, sensible mask slipped and something else looked out. A woman who had loved other women in this house, none of whom, Aria suspected, had made it to breakfast as themselves. "Miss Voss," Mrs. Calvano said, "for what it is worth, I have worked in this family for 31 years. I have seen them all. I have seen the father. I have seen the uncles. I have seen the cousins. I will tell you only one thing, and then I will not say anything else on the subject ever again. The boy in that library is not the worst of them. That doesn't mean he is good enough. That is for you to decide. I'm only telling you where he ranks." Aria swallowed. "Thank you," she said. "Go on down. I've put fresh coffee on the tray. He hasn't eaten." "Neither have I." "Then eat together." She went down. The library door was ajar. She pushed it open without knocking. Kyle was at the desk this time, not the window. He had clearly been there for hours. Papers were spread out in front of him. Real handwritten ones, yellow legal pad, the kind of unglamorous paper lawyers and tired men used. He looked up when she came in. He had not shaved. His eyes were the tired dark eyes again, but the set of his shoulders was different. Loose. Ready. Like a man who had stopped bracing against a blow and had decided to simply stand in the open. "Aria." "Kyle." She walked to the chair across from him and sat down. She did not sit on the edge this time. She sat all the way back. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at him across the desk. She looked at the yellow legal pad. "Is that the list?" she said. "That's the list." "How long is it?" 11 pages. She felt something complicated move in her chest. "Read it to me," she said. "Every page?" "Every page." He drew the top sheet toward him. He cleared his throat. His hand, she saw, was finally steady. Outside the library window, the silver morning was beginning to turn pale gold at the edges, and rain was starting again on the glass, very softly, the way it had been falling a week ago when she had first come up this drive in the back of a sedan with a suitcase on the seat beside her and no voice in her mouth at all. "Number 1, he read, and she listened. He read for almost an hour. Some of it was what she had expected. No more watching, no intermediaries. Any information about her that came into his hands came to her within 24 hours, unredacted, even the ugly pieces, even the pieces he thought would make her leave. Any decision about her life, where she went, who she saw, whether she left the estate, whether she used the phone, whether she saw her father again, was hers, full stop. And if anyone in the Moretti organization tried to route around her through him, he would tell her which man had tried and when. He would not carry that man's water. He would not cover that man's mouth. Her name was not a favor he owed the family anymore. Some of it she had not expected. He said he would not put a child in her until she asked him to. He said that plainly, at the desk, without looking down, because he understood, he said, that there was a version of this house where a baby was a leash, and he was not going to be the man holding the leash. He said that if they eventually had a child, it would be a decision made twice, once by her and once by him, and in that order. He said he had been keeping a separate set of books for 2 years on the parts of the family business he believed could be wound down without killing anyone, and that he wanted to show her those books within the month and let her tell him which pieces, if any, she wanted a hand in shutting off. He said that he would not lie to her about the rest of the business either. He would tell her what he was doing. He would tell her when someone died because of an order he had given. He would not make her share the weight of it, but he would not hide it from her because hiding it, he said, was what men in his family had done to women in his family for 100 years, and he had seen what that particular silence grew into by the time a woman was 50. He said, near the end, on a page that had been rewritten more than the others, she could tell by the crossouts that if at any point in their life together she told him she was leaving, he would not argue. He would not ask her to stay. He would drive her to wherever she was going, if she wanted him to, and if she didn't, he would call a car for her, and he would close the door of that car, and he would not follow, and he would not look for her, and he would not send a man. Not one, he said, and he looked up at her when he read that, because he understood it was the sentence her father had not, in his entire life, been able to say to a woman. He read the last page. He set the yellow pad on the desk. He put his hands flat on either side of it, palms down. He looked at her. That's all of it, he said. His voice was hoarse from an hour of talking. That's the list. Aria sat very still in the chair. Her throat was tight. Her eyes were not wet, but there was a small pressure behind them that she knew would become wet if she let it. She did not let it. Not yet. She needed the next few minutes clean. Kael, she said. Yeah. I need to say something, and I need you to understand that I am not arguing with the list. The list is... She shook her head because the word good was a lie, and the word enough was a bigger one. The list is a real piece of work. I see it. I see that it cost you something to write down, so I want to say this carefully. Okay? The list is not what I'm going to decide on. He nodded once, slowly. He did not flinch. He had, she thought, expected something like this. If I stay, she said, it is not going to be because you gave me 11 pages in a library, because 11 pages can be retyped. 11 pages can be amended on a Tuesday when the mood changes. If I stay, Kael, it's going to be because of what happens on the day the list isn't enough. When your father walks in that door, or mine, or some man we haven't even been introduced to yet, and what's on that page runs out, that is the day I'm going to find out whether any of this was real. Yes. So I am not going to tell you today whether I am staying. Okay? I am going to stay for another month, she said. That is the word we are going to use. Stay, not engaged, not about to be married, staying, present tense. And in that month, a car horn sounded far off down at the gate. They both went still. Kael's head did not snap toward the window. He didn't need to. He knew, the way a man knows the step of his own father on a stair, his jaw set. He closed his eyes for one short beat. Well, he said quietly, that's a day earlier than I thought. Your father, my father. Giovanni Moretti walked into the foyer of his own house 15 minutes later like a man arriving at a minor meeting he had scheduled himself. He did not take off his coat. He did not look at Mrs. Calvano, who stood very still at the corridor arch with her hands folded. He walked to the center of the foyer, and he stopped there. And he looked up at the landing, and he waited. Aria watched him from the open library door. She had not come out yet. Kael had walked past her, said only stay where you are until I call for you, and she had, after a second of pure reflex rage, understood that he was not trying to hide her. He was trying to make his father come to her, trying to make sure that the first words spoken between the two of them were spoken on her terms, not his. Kael, Giovanni said to the foyer. Pop. Kael came down the stairs unhurried. Giovanni Moretti did not look like his son. That was the first thing she thought. In her head, built from newspaper stories and her uncle's mutterings and 6 weeks of imagination, she had constructed a heavier, bulkier man, gray-jowled, hard-eyed. The actual Giovanni was small, almost thin, with very white hair cut short. His eyes were gray, not dark, and they had an unblinking patience that she recognized at once. It was a patience she knew from her own father, but more, a patience with the quality of a clock, a long clock, a clock that had been running for 50 years and was in no hurry to stop. "You kept her," Giovanni said. Kael stopped on the last stair. "She stayed. That's not the same thing. It is in this house now." The older man's eyes moved, not to the library where Aria stood, not to Mrs. Calvano in the arch, but around the foyer, as if taking inventory of it. The kind of look a landlord gives a room. For a moment, Aria understood, on a deep physical level, how 30 years of being looked at like that could silence a woman. "Donato was here last night," Giovanni said. "He was. He left. He did. Without her." "Yes. Because you told him to." "Because she did, Pop. She told him. I stood on the stairs." Giovanni's face did not change. He looked at his son for a long, flat second. "Well," he said, "bring her in. Let me see. She's in the library. You're welcome to her company if she wants yours." Giovanni's head turned half an inch. "Excuse me," he said. "You heard me." "Son, I said what I said." There was a small shift in the foyer, a tightening of air that Aria understood came from the two of Giovanni's men who had followed him in. Their hands had not moved. Their eyes had. That was all. Kael noticed. He did not move either. His stillness, Aria realized, was its own kind of answer. He had not raised his voice. He had not postured. He had simply, in front of his father's soldiers, declined. She could not stay in the library anymore. She stepped into the doorway. Giovanni Moretti turned his head, and for the first time in her life she met his eyes. They were not cruel. That was what was worst about them. Cruel she could have fought. Cruelty was a language she knew. His eyes were something else. They were used to her. They had been looking at her for 6 years without her knowing. They were the eyes of a man for whom she had been a file, a photograph, a set of reports, and now, at last, a body in a doorway. And she saw, in the half-second before he composed his face, a small flicker of satisfaction. The small proprietary pleasure of a man whose long-running project has walked out onto the lawn. She put that look in her memory, carefully. She would need it later. "Mr. Moretti?" she said. "Aria," he said. He smiled. It was a small, warm, practiced smile, and she understood in that instant why he was the man he was in the world. "Come in, please." "I am in." A small hesitation, then the smile held. "Come sit with me, then. Your father and I—" "I'm not going to sit with you." The smile did not break. It simply paused. She could see him calculating underneath at clock speed. "I think we got off on a strange foot last night," he said gently. "Your father and I had words on the phone this morning. There's been some excitement from a rival family. Things have been said that shouldn't have been. I've come to make that right, with you in the room, so that we can all move forward." "We," she said. "We." "Mr. Moretti." "Giovanni, please." "Mr. Moretti," she said again calmly. "I am not in your we. I have never been in your we. I am going to say some things to you now, and you are going to listen to them the way my father listened to me last night, which is with your mouth closed. And when I'm finished, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to walk out of this house, or you're going to sit in that chair by the fire, and you are going to stop pretending that I am a girl you just met." The foyer did not breathe. One of his men shifted his weight. Giovanni did not look at the man. He did not need to. The man stopped shifting. "All right," Giovanni said softly. She stepped fully out of the library doorway. "You had men watching me since I was 12, she said. "I have been told. I believe it. I am not going to ask you to confirm or deny. I am not interested in that conversation. I am interested in this one." "Aria?" "No." Her voice came out sharper than she'd meant. He stopped. You're going to listen the way I said you would listen, she said, or you're going to leave. A small, long beat. All right, he said again, quieter. I stayed last night because I chose to, she said. Not because your son charmed me, not because I forgave him, not because I was trapped. I chose to because I have spent 18 years not choosing anything. And last night I finally had a fight in me, and I used it on my own father, and I had a little bit left over, and I used that to walk up the stairs to a room with a lock on the inside. I am telling you that, Mr. Moretti, because I want you to understand that whatever you came here to sell me this morning, I am not in it. I am in my own we. I am in a we of one at the moment, and I am going to grow it over a month by my own count, and you are not going to be in it, ever. Not because I am angry, though I am, but because you forfeited it when I was 12. Giovanni Moretti's face did not move. My son, he started. Your son is a separate question. I will answer it without your help. He is my heir. That is your problem, not mine. A thin pause. The clock patience ticked behind his eyes, visible for a second, looking for a way around. You are living in my house, he said gently, almost apologetically, the way a man might correct a child. Your son's house. My house. Mr. Moretti. Young lady, I am living in his house, Aria said, as of last night, as of a conversation he and I had on the stairs. You were not present. I do not recognize your claim to the floor I am standing on, and neither, I think, if you push him, does he. So please do not pretend this is a lease. I am not going to be evicted. Something in Giovanni's face, something very small at the corner of the mouth, moved. It was the first entirely unrehearsed expression she had seen on him. It was, she realized, a flicker of something she did not expect. It was respect, not warm respect, not grandfatherly, not kindly. It was the cold recognition of one operator for another. It was the same look her father had given her last night halfway down the stairs, when she had used the word folder. It was the look men in her world gave each other when they had just been shown, without warning, that the chessboard had another piece on it that they had not previously known was in play. I see, Giovanni said. Good, Aria said. My son. Yes. Is he... Giovanni looked at Kael, who had not spoken in 3 minutes. Is he making his decisions these days from the library? He is making them, Kael said. In the foyer, in front of you, right now. I see. I'm not marrying her this week, Pop, Kael said. His voice was low and even. I'm not marrying her next week. I am not putting that on her. When and if we get married, it will be because she walked into a room and said the words herself. Not because a priest was scheduled, not because you picked a date. That's the thing I came downstairs to tell you. I wrote it on a legal pad upstairs. I'll have it notarized if you want. I'll have it printed. I don't care, but it is not up for discussion. Kael, it is not up for discussion. Giovanni looked at him a long moment, then slowly he nodded. It was not an approving nod. It was a nod that said, I am filing this, and I will think about it for a long time, and we will see who is correct about whose house this is. She could read it clearly. It did not frighten her. It was what she had expected. You do not break a man like Giovanni Moretti in a foyer in the morning. You only force him to look once at the fact that the room has changed shape, and then you send him back to his car, and you spend the next 20 years making the new shape harder for him to undo. I will be in touch, Giovanni said. I'm sure, Aria said. Miss Voss. Mr. Moretti? He walked out. His men followed. The door closed. The smell of his cologne lingered in the foyer for a few minutes more, something cold and woody and expensive, and then Mrs. Calvano, without being asked, opened a window. Aria stood there shaking again. She didn't hide it. She just let her hand find the library doorframe and rest on it until the shaking eased. Cale did not come near her. He stood where he was. Well, he said after a minute. Don't, she said. Okay. Not yet, just let me stand here. Okay. She stood there a long time. Set. The first month went like that, full of small, unfinished things. She did not call her father, not for 3 weeks. When she finally did, it was from the kitchen phone at the estate in the late afternoon, with Mrs. Calvano pretending very hard to be busy with silverware 6 feet away. Her father picked up on the second ring. His voice was careful. He did not ask her to come home. He asked her if she was eating. He asked if the ocean was loud at night. He asked, at the end, hesitantly, if she wanted him to send up any of her mother's old books, because he had found a box of them in the basement he hadn't known was still there. She said yes. She said she would like that. She said she would call again in a couple of weeks. She hung up and stood there for a long time in the kitchen, and Mrs. Calvano, still polishing a fork that did not need polishing, said without looking up, "Miss, it isn't nothing, a man like that offering to send books. I've known him longer than you. That is the most he can do. You are allowed to take it and still not go home." Aria nodded and wiped her nose on her sleeve and went upstairs. A week after that, she met Kael's mother. Mrs. Calvano had told her quietly one morning, "Today is a good day." Aria had walked the long corridor to the east wing with something tight in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite grief. The room had been bright, heavy curtains pulled all the way back, the windows open, a small record player going something soft and Italian in the corner. Elena Moretti sat in an armchair in a cardigan that was too big for her, and when Aria walked in, the older woman had looked at her, really looked at her, and her eyes had filled with tears before Aria had said a word. "Oh," Elena had said, in a voice that was rusty from not being used much. "Oh, you poor thing. Come sit by me. Come sit." And Aria had sat. And neither of them had said anything brave or important. Elena had held her hand. Elena's hand had been thin and warm. After a while, Elena had said, "He is not his father. I know that is not enough for you. But you should know that I know it. I raised him, and I know it." And Aria had said, "I am not asking you to vouch for him." And Elena had said, "Good girl, don't." And they had sat for another half hour without talking. And when Aria had stood up to leave, Elena had said, "Come back. Come back when you want. Not when he tells you to." And Aria had said, "I will." And she had. Twice a week for the rest of that month, and then 3 times. And then whenever Elena was up to it, which became more often as the weeks went on, because there is a thing about being looked at by someone new, someone who knows the whole of the story and stays anyway, that pulls a person slowly back into the room. Aria painted. She painted a lot. The studio became hers in a quiet way no one needed to announce. The canvas of her father's house stayed on the easel for weeks, unfinished, until one evening she painted over it in long, cold blues and started something else, which was what she had needed to do with it all along. She did not paint Kael. She thought about painting him. She didn't. She had read somewhere, a long time ago, that you never paint someone you are still deciding about. Maybe one day. Kael, for his part, did the thing that was hardest for men in his family to do. He did nothing flashy. He did not buy her rings. He did not rearrange the house. He did not give her speeches. He read the list he had written back to himself every week, out loud, in the library with her in the chair, like a man going over a contract. And when pieces of it stopped applying, he crossed them out with her permission. And when new pieces needed to be added, he wrote them in the margins and read them to her, and she signed off on them, or didn't. It was the least romantic thing in the world. It was also the most. She had never in her life watched a man change in small, honest, measurable ways without any audience to play to. She had only ever seen men change for a room, for a wife, for a priest, for a jury, for a lie. Watching Kael change because she'd asked him to, and then keep changing when no one was watching. But her was, she understood, the thing slowly dismantling her in ways she had not given permission for. The Iannucci problem did not go away on its own. It got worse before it got better. There was a second attempt on the house 2 weeks after the first one, this time at the boathouse, this time with more men. Kael came home at 4 in the morning with a cut across his eyebrow that needed 5 stitches, and he sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Calvano cleaned the blood out of his hair with a warm washcloth and scolded him in a steady, tired voice. Aria had come down in her bathrobe, and she had stood in the doorway and she had watched, because she had told him, in the first week, "I want to know when things happen, not the next morning. When?" He had called her at 2:15. He had said, "I am fine. There was an incident. I'm going to be home in 2 hours. I did not kill anyone." She had said, "Thank you for calling." She had hung up. She had not been able to go back to sleep. At 4:30 in the kitchen, she had sat down across from him at the table while Mrs. Calvano worked on his eyebrow, and she had said, "Tell me what you did." And he had told her. All of it. the specifics, the names, the one man who had been a boy, practically, 19, who had been tied up in the boathouse and had cried, and whom Kael had driven to a bus station himself with $300 and the number of a cousin in another state. She had listened. She had not said good. She had not said, I approve. She had said only, you could have killed him. You didn't. I want you to remember that you didn't on the nights you feel like you have to. He had looked at her across the table with the butterfly bandage half applied to his eyebrow, and he had said, in a voice she had not heard before from him, okay. That was all. Okay. She understood it as something larger than okay. She understood it, though she didn't say so, as the thing that let her, a week later, for the first time sit next to him on the couch in the morning room and fall asleep against his shoulder while he read a newspaper. She woke up 2 hours later to find him still in the same position, the paper still folded to the same page, because he had not wanted to wake her by moving his arm. That was the first time she let him touch her. It was also, she realized afterward, the first time she had fallen asleep somewhere other than a locked room since she was 11 years old. The Iannucci War did not end. Wars in their world did not end. They tapered. Kael spent a lot of the second month and the third on the phone, and in long, quiet meetings in the library that Aria was welcome to sit in on, and after the first few, often did. She did not say much in those meetings at first. She watched. She learned names. She learned, for the first time in her life, how the machine actually worked, not the dramatic version her uncles had always offered at dinner, but the boring real version, which was a lot of logistics and a lot of trucking, and a lot of men owed small favors by other men. She began, very slowly, to have opinions. She began very slowly to say them out loud. The first time she interrupted a man who was twice her age in that library and corrected him about a shipping schedule, there was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. Then Kael said, mildly, without looking up from the page in front of him, "She's right, Tony. Fix it." And Tony had fixed it. And nobody had interrupted Aria again in that particular way. Giovanni Moretti did not come back to the estate for a long time. He made his dissatisfaction felt in small ways: a missing payment, a diverted shipment, a phone call at an inconvenient hour. Kael absorbed most of it without telling her the details, except when she asked, and then he told her. Once, in the 4th month, Kael came home from a meeting in the city with his father and went straight up to the shower for a long time, and came down with wet hair and sat on the couch next to her and said, "He offered me everything if I send you home." And she said, "What did you say?" And he said, "I said no." And she said, "And then what?" And he said, "And then he hit me." She looked at him. He had the beginnings of a bruise on his jaw that she had somehow missed. She reached up and she touched it, very lightly, with 2 fingers. She had not touched his face before. He held very still. "He hit you," she said. "Yeah," he said. "And you didn't hit back," she said. "No," he said. "I don't hit him. I'm not going to, ever. That's one of the things I decided a long time ago." "Good," she said quietly. "Keep deciding it." She left her hand on his jaw a second longer, then she took it away. That was all. That was the whole moment, but something in her that night let another small old lock go. Her father came up for dinner in the 6th month. It was awkward. Mrs. Calvano made a roast that was too big, and they all ate too little of it. Her father did not know what to do with his hands. Kael was careful not to fill the silences. Aria filled them herself, in small flat pieces, and at the end of the evening, out on the porch while her father waited for Benny to bring the car around, Donato Voss looked at his daughter and said, "You look like your mother." And Aria said, "I know, Dad. I've always looked like her." And her father said, "No. I mean right now, this month. Your mouth. The way you said it." She used to set her mouth like that when she was about to win an argument. "I haven't seen that face since before you were born." And he had gotten into the car and gone, and Aria had stood on the porch in the cold in her cardigan, and she had understood something then about what it cost a man like her father to say a sentence like that. And she understood also that forgiveness was not going to be a single act in her life. It was going to be an accounting, small entries. Over years, she could live with that. With Elena Moretti died in the spring of the 2nd year. It was not sudden. She had been tired for a long time. Aria sat with her the last 3 days, mostly in silence, sometimes reading to her from an old book of poems Elena liked, occasionally brushing her hair. Kael came in and out. At the end, it was the three of them in the room, and Elena had held out her hand to Aria with the little strength she had left, and had said, in that rusty voice, "You married him." And Aria had hesitated, because technically they had married quietly 6 weeks before at a city hall with only Mrs. Calvano and a stranger as witnesses. And Aria had not yet called it that out loud in front of Elena, because Aria had not wanted Elena to think she had waited to see if Elena was dying before making the choice. But the choice, she understood, was much older than the paperwork. "Yes," she said. "I did." And Elena had smiled, a small, tired, real smile, and had said, "On purpose," and Aria had said, "On purpose." "Yes." And Elena had closed her eyes. And she had stayed alive another 5 hours, breathing more and more softly. And when she went the way a candle goes in a room with an open window. Aria was still holding her hand. Their daughter was born a year after that. Aria was not quiet during labor. This surprised her. She had spent 18 years teaching her body not to make sound. And apparently once the body was forced into a big enough room by a big enough thing, the training failed completely. She yelled. She swore. She swore in Italian, which she had not known she remembered. At one point, in the middle of it, she looked over and saw Kael sitting next to the bed, with her hand in both of his, and his face was wet, and she said, through her teeth, "Are you crying?" And he said, "A little, yeah." And she said, "Good." And something about that had made her laugh, which had turned into another contraction, which had made her swear at him, which had made him laugh. And that was maybe the first true easy moment between them. In the middle of a mess. She filed it away. They named the baby Elena. They had talked about it for months. They had gone around on other names. In the end, it had been Kael who'd said it, one night in the kitchen, quietly, not pushing. "What about my mother's name?" And Aria, who had expected him to say it, and had been waiting for him to, had said, "Okay," and that was that. The baby looked mostly like Kael, with Aria's stubborn mouth. She was a serious, watchful baby. She did not cry much. She looked at people a long time before she smiled at them. Mrs. Calvano, who had buried 2 of her own children decades ago and did not speak of them, would hold Elena sometimes in the afternoons and hum to her in the kitchen in a language Aria could not place. Aria did not bring her daughter to her father for a year. When she finally did, it was on her own terms. She drove down herself with Kael in the passenger seat and the baby in the back in a car seat, and they sat in the parlor of the brownstone in Queens and drank bad coffee, and her father held his granddaughter with the stiff, careful terror of a man who had been convinced for some time that he would never be allowed to. Aria watched him hold the baby. She did not speak. She watched him, and she thought about her mother, and she thought about the folder, and she thought about the 4 words he had said to her in the foyer, "I don't know how." And she thought, not for the first time, that what she had done by staying at the Moretti estate had not only been a choice about her own life. It had been a choice that had split a small piece of ice somewhere deep in her father's chest that no other thing in 40 years had managed to touch. She did not forgive him for any of it, exactly. She let him hold the baby. That was not forgiveness. That was a different thing, a smaller, more sustainable thing. And she was learning, very slowly, the names of those smaller things and how to live on them. On the drive home, Kael said, without looking at her, "You did good back there." She said, "I didn't do anything." He said, "Yes, you did." She didn't answer, but she reached over and she put her hand on his leg, and she left it there most of the way home, and he covered her hand with his and didn't squeeze, just rested it. Years later, and it would be years, and there would be more fights, more Iannucci trouble, one very bad winter when Kael nearly didn't come home from a meeting in Baltimore. And Aria sat up the whole night with a pistol she did not particularly want on the kitchen table, and the baby asleep upstairs and Mrs. Calvano, old by then, asleep in the chair across from her. Years later, Aria would sit on this porch at dusk with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and she would think about the 18-year-old girl who had ridden up the cliff road in the back of a sedan with a suitcase that weighed nothing. She would think about how close she had come so many times to being swallowed, how the world she had been born into had been engineered very carefully over generations to make sure a girl like her never found her own voice, and that if she did, she would only find it in time to scream into a pillow. She would think about all the things she had been told were the way it is. All of them had been lies. Not big cinematic lies. Small ones. You adjust. You don't embarrass the family. Love is expensive and fear is cheap. You don't have a choice. This is the best deal you're going to get. Lies, everyone. They had only been true for as long as nobody in the room told the truth, and the minute somebody did, they'd fallen apart like wet paper. She would think about the thing that took her the longest to learn, which was that being chosen by someone was not the same as choosing, and that being safe was not the same as being seen. She would think about how the list Kael had read to her in the library, 11 pages long, had been the beginning and not the end of anything. They had rewritten it 20 times over the years. They had violated it, both of them, in small ways, and fought about it, and apologized and revised it. It was not a document, it was a practice. It was how she understood eventually that love in her life was not going to be a thing that arrived. It was going to be a thing that was done, over and over. On ordinary Tuesdays, in tired voices, with real hands. She would think also about her daughter, who was by then not a baby, who was a little girl who argued with her father about whether she was allowed to ride her bike past the gate, who had Aria's mouth and Elena's laugh and the good steady eyes of a child who had never, not once in her life, had to fold herself small to fit into a room. And she would think about the quietest, most private promise she had ever made to anyone, which was the promise she had made, wordlessly, holding her daughter in a hospital bed in her first hour of life. You will not be handed to anyone. You will not be in anyone's folder. You will walk into rooms you chose. You will leave rooms you chose. You will say no out loud until the men around you stop being surprised by the sound. She would not raise her daughter the way she had been raised. That, she understood, was the victory. Not the marriage, not the estate, not even the list. The quiet, ordinary, unspectacular victory of a woman who had been raised to disappear and had not disappeared, and who was now raising another small human being who would start, from the beginning, with a voice in her mouth, and would not have to spend 18 years learning where hers had gone. And on the porch at dusk, with the tea cold in her hand, Aria Voss, Aria Moretti, now, by paperwork, but mostly just Aria, which was the name she had finally claimed for herself one morning in front of a bathroom mirror with a green dress on, would hear the front door open behind her, and her daughter's quick small feet on the wood, and a man's slower step after them, and she would not turn around right away. She would let them come to her. She would let herself be the thing at the end of their walk. And when her daughter climbed into her lap smelling like outdoors and shampoo, and when Kael sat down on the top step below them and leaned his back carefully against her knees. Like a man afraid of asking too much, Aria would put one hand on her daughter's hair and the other hand on her husband's shoulder, and she would look out at the ocean she had once stared at from a locked bedroom, and she would think, without fanfare, without poetry, the truest sentence of her life. I built this. On purpose. With both hands. And for the first time, when the light went out of the sky, no part of her flinched. No part of her waited for a door.